Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning and Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Chanel Wickenden, to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending online to ensure they can hear and be heard. Chanel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I confirm the following officer is in attendance and can hear us and we can hear them? We have Matt Armstrong.
Yes, hello. Hopefully you can see me and hear me.
We can just about hear you, yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go through, are there any other officers in attendance with us? Thank you. We'll go through the rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted to your request. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to speak, when requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone units. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room, and the results will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start? Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I received apologies from Councillor Simon Bloxham and Daniel Allen. Having given due notice, Councillor Michael Muir will be substituting for Councillor Bloxham and Councillor Bryn Stanley will be substituting for Councillor Daniel Allen. Are there any further apologies? No? Item 2, minutes of the 6th of July, 11th of July and the 27th of July 2023. I propose we take as read and approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 6th of July, 11th of July and 27th of July as a true record of proceedings. Unless there are any objections, I plan to take these as one. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Debenham. Thank you. Any comments on the minutes? Thank you. Can we go to the vote, please, Chanel?
Chair, that vote is carried.
Thank you. Item 3, notification of other business. There is none. Item 4, Chair's announcements. Recording. In accordance with Council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available to view on the Council's mod.gov website or YouTube page. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about which and the speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes. There's one item where in fact it's 10 minutes for each group of speakers, supporters and objectors. There's a separate 5-minute time limit allocated to member advocates. A warning will be given at 4 minutes to alert you that you have 1 minute left. At 5 minutes, you'll be advised that the time allowed has ended and the speaker must cease. I've agreed to extend the speaking time allocated to item 7, and for each group will be allowed to speak for 10 minutes. Section 4.8.23a. For the purpose of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Deferral of an item. Item 8 has been deferred from this committee to the meeting on a date to be decided, as you're waiting on a response from the environmental health consultee and to allow time to review comments received relating to air quality. Item 5, public participation. Can I confirm the following registered speakers are in attendance? Clive Self, Harry Jenkinson, Councillor Tom Tyson, yes, James Colgrave, Julie Stoddard, Councillor Lisa Nash, Rob Shaw, Edward Wainwright, Stuart Redaway, Parish Councillor Robert Moore, Lorna Else, Councillor Claire Strong, David Fletcher, James Graham, Dr. Julia McGill, and Paul Birchall. Thank you. Item 6, 23/00666/FP, Dix's Meadow, High Street, Ashwell. Anne MacDonald to present, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors and members of the public. Since the report is published, I've got one update. This is the Ashwell Parish Council has stated the following, and I'll read it out to you. It says, I note that you recommend rejection of the application. However, should the council approve the application or rejection be overturned on appeal, the parish council wishes to claim a financial contribution as part of the planning obligations under section 106 of the TCPA 1990. This would be to cover the community centre, leisure and sports needs that would grow due to the development being in line with local plan policy SP7. They've asked for a contribution under the heading of the Ashwell Pavilion project in the region of 21,736.50, so just under £22,000. I can confirm that the applicant has agreed to this contribution. Can I please have the first slide? Next slide, please. Thank you. The application site is the sort of purple hatched area in the middle of the plan, sort of the orange line extending with the rectangle behind that. It relates to an area of open land known as Dix's Meadow or Donkey Field and is located in Ashwell on the north side of the High Street opposite Dix's Barns. The front section of the site is located within the Ashwell Conservation Area, and there are a number of listed buildings, which are the dark purple buildings on that map, opposite and near to the site. The proposed development is located outside of the settlement boundary as defined by the local plan as a Category A village, and therefore is in the area termed rural area beyond the Greenbelt, where there is a general policy of restraint against new development. Next slide, please. This photo shows the High Street looking into the site. The site is a greenfield site which currently contributes to the green infrastructure in the village with boundaries including mixes of hedgerows and small trees. Next slide, please. This shows the location of the access point. It's immediately to the right of that large tree, which is actually shown to be retained but cut back on the plans. Next slide, please. The adjacent property, Oak House, can be seen here, which is in close proximity to where the access will be. Next slide, please. This photo shows the neighbouring properties on Beacon's Yard, and the white dwelling in the corner is Dixie's cottage. Next slide, please. This is the proposed layout plan. This shows the new vehicle access from the High Street, which is to serve the development. The proposed housing mix is 7 times 5 beds, 2 times 4 beds, 2 times 2 beds, which is for affordable, and 1 times 3 beds, which is for affordable. As you can see, the proposed dwelling house is set back from the High Street with open amenity land fronting the High Street. There's also open space and a play area located at the back of the site within the built development concentrated in the middle of the site. Next slide, please. This shows cross-section AA, which is actually behind the frontage bit, so kind of taken through that open space at the front. It shows the relationship between Oak House and plot 3 and the distance from plots 1, 4 to 6 to Dix's cottage and the house on Beacon's Yard. The access road will be in front of these houses and the bend round is between plots 1 and 2. Cross-section BB shows those homes that run north into the site. Plots 6, 8 and 9 are the proposed 2.5-storey high dwellings and located fairly centrally in the middle of the site. Next slide, please. Cross-section CC shows 2 semi-detached dwellings with affordable units. These are plots 10 and 11 with parking in the front, and cross-section DD shows the other affordable dwelling at plot 12. The office report sets out clear objections to this application, which are outlined. Those objections on the heritage basis, and the proposed development is considered to have an adverse impact on the rural character of the area. And there's also a holding objection from the LLFA and a lack of an agreed Section 106 agreement. As a result, there's not considered to be public benefits that outweigh the harms proposed by this application. Then the application is therefore recommended for refusal on this basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Can I invite Tom Tyson to sit in the main body? As he will be a member advocate. I'm going to ask for questions. Can I just make clear to the public that when I ask for questions, these are questions from the members, the councillors, to the speaker about clarification, not for anyone to ask questions. Thank you. Any questions of Anne? No? Shall we go on to the registered speakers then, please? Have we got Mr. Clive Self? Are you ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
When you want to.
Thank you very much. My name's Clive Self. I'm a resident of Ashwell. I'm speaking on behalf of the Parish Council. I'm a chartered landscape architect and urban designer. In short, the site is not an allocated site. It lies outside of the village envelope and in part falls within the conservation area. Facing onto the southern boundary of the site is the Grade 2 listed building of Dix's farmhouse, and immediately to the southwest, the Grade 2 listed building of Old Cottage. There are also a series of views through the site to the Grade 1 listed building of St Mary's Church. The application site falls within the countryside and is currently a sheep grazed meadow. It allows views from the village to the open countryside beyond, as we've just seen in the photographs. The MPPF requires all development to be of high quality design and to equally respect the setting of listed buildings and conservation areas. The submitted application clearly does not meet these requirements. The application that has been submitted is a generic cul-de-sac layout that does not respect nor reflect the character of the historic village of Ashwell. West End and the High Street typically have housing fronting onto these two streets that run through the heart of the village. To introduce a cul-de-sac of development that is perpendicular to the alignment of the streets would be completely at odds with the prevailing pattern of development within the village, the greater part of which falls within the conservation area. Development on the site would also harm the setting of Dix's farmhouse, which has a relationship to the open farmland which the proposed development would occupy. Public views that are currently available across the site to the open countryside will be lost. The proposed alignment of the road, which serves the development, is orientated in such a way as to prevent views from the site frontage to the countryside beyond. Although there will be some views from within the development to the countryside to the north, these will, for a large extent, be truncated by the parking which is proposed at the end of the access road. On any reasonable basis, the development cannot be described as infill development, as it extends significantly further north than the curtilage of the neighbouring properties. The loss of open countryside that is actively farmed would undoubtedly give rise to a significant level of harm. The level of harm would be further exacerbated by harm to the conservation area, the impact on the setting of the neighbouring listed buildings, and the poor quality of the design. The local flood authority have objected and pointed out that a depth of 300 to 600 millimetres of floodwater could occur around a number of properties. The applicant has sought to resolve this issue by elevating the slab level of the buildings. This would clearly result in even greater level of harm to the character of the village and the conservation area. So to conclude, the development should be refused as it will cause irreparable harm to the character of the historic village of Ashwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harry Jenkinson.
Thank you very much. As a young, born and bred Ashwell resident, representing all residents of the parish, I can take a long-term view of the future of the village. I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Self and the NHDC planning officer, who says that this proposal represents a clear and identified harm to the heritage asset, an adverse impact to the rural character of the area, includes a holding objection from the LLFA due to the flood risk it poses, and is no agreed S106, and therefore planning permission should be refused, because it isn't just any other development on our beautiful wildflower meadow. It's a particularly damaging proposal.
1 minute warning.
Which, as countless accounts, reports, and other evidence presented before this committee have shown, would cause unprecedented damage and totally ruin the rural, environmental, and historical character of Ashwell Village, spoiling the very nature of open countryside as we know it in North Herts. Whatever Jarvis Holmes claim, the facts cannot be denied. This proposed development includes building outside the conservation area and outside the neighbourhood plan for development, which of course NHDC has been consulted about. It's evidently wholly unsuitable for the site and for Ashwell, falling well outside of the good standards set by this very committee. There were 165 detailed official objections from Ashwell residents to this development, and not a single comment in favour. We don't want our last wildflower meadow to be destroyed. And so on behalf of the people of Ashwell Parish here in North Herts, I fully implore each and every committee member this evening to please vote no to this disastrous proposal, which is neither sustainable, affordable, nor practical, and as the planning officer notes, falls well outside of North Herts District Council's own regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification from members from Mr. Self or Mr. Jenkinson? No? Thank you. Can I then go to Councillor Tom Tyson?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be mercifully brief. We've heard from Mr. Self and Mr. Jenkinson and from the case officer about what is one of the least policy compliant applications I've ever seen in this committee. There's very little I can add to what's already in the officer's report. I'll just very briefly summarise the reasons that I think that you should refuse this application. It's first of all outside of the settlement boundary, and it contains primarily larger dwellings which don't meet the aspirations expressed in Ashwell's neighbourhood plan. We've heard about the harm to the heritage assets of the conservation area and the listed building, Dixie's Farm. We've heard about the negative impact on the rural character of Ashwell High Street and the views through the meadow to the church and beyond. And we've heard that no Section 106 agreement has been concluded. All of these issues are summarised in the conclusion of the case officer's very well-written report at 4.4.1, and there's really very little I feel I can add to that, so I will leave you to your reflections on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification from members? No. Can I ask the chair to can I ask the officer to respond to any issues raised? No. Okay. Does Tom leave at this point? Councillor Tyson is going to leave us. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I think this one is summed up quite easily in paragraphs 4.3.18, the first few lines of that on page 39, page 4.3.53 on page 47, the first few lines of that. it says a conservation officer concludes that less than substantial harm would be occasioned to the actual conservation area. Less than substantial still means there is some harm to the conservation area. 4.5.53 says NPPF advises the determined applications new development making a positive contribution to local character and distinctiveness, and that great weight should be given to the assets conservation. And I think those two little bits sum this whole thing up, and therefore I would move the recommendation that we refuse it.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Nolan?
Yes, happy to second.
Thank you. Should we go to debate? The debate? Shall we go to the vote, please, Chanel?
Yes to refuse. Yeah.
Okay, shall I make it clear? Yes.
So
Yes.
to clarify, it's yes to refuse the application. Chair, the motion to refuse the application is carried. Yes. First of all, we just got to wait for Councillor Councillor Tyson to hear the declaration. The application was refused.
Thank you.
I think I'm probably now going to ask Councillor Tyson to actually go again.
Yes, I've just come back in to say that I have to leave again because I have a non-registrable interest and an other registrable interest in the application that you're about to hear next. So I'll bid you farewell once more.
Before we continue with item 7, which is 22/00741/FP Land West of Ashwell Road, Bygrave, I need to read you an email which we received about half an hour ago while you were sitting here from the Secretary of State or his PA. I am directed by the Secretary of State to refer to the above planning application. In exercise his duties, his powers under Article 31 of the Town and Country Planning Act, Order 2015, the Secretary of State hereby directs your council not to grant permission on this application without specific authorisation. This direction is issued to enable him to consider whether he should direct under Section 77 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 that the application should be referred to him for determination. This direction does not, of course, prevent your council from considering the application, forming a view as to the merits or, if they're minded, refusing permission. This letter is procedural, the procedural purposes, and should not be read as an indication of the Secretary of State's attitude towards the application scheme. Would you like to explain that in words of one syllable?
Yes, we've received it. We received a direction from the Secretary of State, basically preventing us from granting planning permission this evening. We can consider the application, form a view on it, and make a resolution. We can refuse planning permission this evening, but what we cannot do is grant planning permission. The holding direction is in place. As the letter says, it doesn't indicate any particular view of the Secretary of State. It is just merely preventing us from issuing the grant of planning permission until the Secretary of State has considered whether he wishes to call it in or not. Okay.
Thank you. So in other words, it's as we were, but at the end, it will go to Secretary of State. Can I call on Peter Ball to present, please?
Thanks, Chair. So yes, this is an application for ground-mounted solar voltaic farm, including battery energy storage, continued agricultural use, ancillary infrastructure, security fencing, landscaping provision, ecological enhancements, and associated works. So there has been today circulated an addendum, a supplementary document to the officer report. This deals with some corrections relating to the Hearts and Fire and Safety Consultation Response at section 3.24 and 4.5.142. The figure to achieve the zero carbon emissions in the district is actually by 2040, section 4.61, and reference to the anaerobic digester at Bygrave Lodge, which has an installed capacity of 2.7 megawatts at section 4.614. The other updates relate to the applicant, who has confirmed that the grid connection capacity is available and energy is deliverable as soon as the development is approved and constructed, and is not subject to wider delays on the transmission network recently discussed in the media. The precise connection route has not yet been decided, but it will be constructed, I'm told, in phases during the same time as the solar farm build out, so that the cable route is ready for export of energy once the solar farm is completed. And finally, the Bygrave Parish Council has sent an additional letter since the report was published to officers requesting conditions be either amended or added in the event that members resolve to grant planning permission. These, as I say, have already been circulated as an addendum. So if we can move on to the slides now, please. So you can see here's the location plan. Just to the right center is the village. So it's in the field immediately as you exit the village on the western side of Ashwell Road. Next slide, please. This is showing the relationship of the site in red edge and the grid connection point just east of Letchworth in the bottom left-hand corner of that drawing, if you can see it. Next slide, please. So this is the site layout plan showing approximate layout of panels and other infrastructure associated with the application. Next slide, please. Here is the landscape and mitigation plan, which identifies the kind of strategic improvements that will be made as part of the development. Next slide, please. In the report, we refer to the temporary access for the construction period, and this hasn't been precisely agreed yet, but this plan illustrates the approximate location of that access. Next slide, please. Section and elevation of the panels to be installed. Next slide, please. As part of the proposal, there's CCTV cameras that will go around the perimeter to a height of 3 meters. Next slide, please. We have the battery storage building here, which is like a typical kind of storage container construction. Next slide, please. Substation building. Next slide, please. And here's the inverter cabin plan. Next slide, please. Fencing details up to 2 meters there. Next slide, please. And here you can see in the report, we talk about Arbury Banks at the very top centre of the plan here, and showing the relationship with the site to the bottom centre of the plan. Next slide, please. Here we have, again, not very clear, but this is a photo montage showing the view from Arbury Banks. Next slide, please. And these are the photographs taken at the existing bridleway to the north of the site in the top, and from the southern section of Ashwell Road in the bottom. Next slide, please. So we have some viewpoints as part of the landscape and visual appraisal that was undertaken. So this first one is viewpoint 5 from Claybush Lane and the right of way number 32. Next slide, please. And viewpoint 8 from Ashwell Road, adjacent to the Knoll. That's a residential property to the north of the site. Next slide, please. Viewpoint 12, which is from the rights of way on Ashwell Road. So all the 3 viewpoints are from the north of the site. Next slide, please. So here we have a photo montage which is provided by the applicant, showing a long distance view from the southeast corner into the site. Next slide, please. And from the same position, but looking in a northerly direction, new tree planting, you can see in the foreground there. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the sectional drawing just to show relationship between the bridleway and the boundary treatments and the actual solar installation. Thank you. So the report sets out the various technical issues. Overall, officers consider that the proposal accords with the development plan and is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from members? Councillor Debenham?
Thank you. I just wondered, how many properties do you think are in the sightline of this?
I would say that the Knoll probably has direct views of it. That's the sole property. I think the rest of the properties are screened.
Thank you.
In my view.
Any other questions? Councillor Mason?
I suppose it's just carrying on from Councillor Debenham's question. So what's the distance again to the nearest property and then the next nearest and whatever?
From the site to the nearest property, we think is about 120, 130 metres.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Okay, thank you. Can we call the registered speakers, please? To remind you, you have 10 minutes between you. Do you wish to know when each 5-minute slot has got a minute left? Just go through, run through. Lovely, thank you. So can I ask Mr. James Colgrove to speak when you're ready?
Okay, thank you. I would like to start by thanking the chair for giving us the opportunity to speak this evening. Julie Stoddard and I represent the Bygrave Action Group. We're a community-based group with no political alignment, set up at the request of Bygrave Parish Council. As a group, we all wholeheartedly support the need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels through investing in all types of clean energy production in the UK and locally. However, this energy production must take place in the right locations. Bygrave already hosts the Biogen anaerobic digester adjacent to the A505, and we would support the siting of a solar plant or wind turbines close to Bygrave as long as they're in an appropriate location. On the 2nd of September, I wrote to you setting out our views on the proposal. On the 10th of September, I followed up with a letter setting out key questions on the planning officer's report. Prior to that, we responded to all 3 consultations leading up to this meeting and provided the officer with separate detailed reports on key aspects of the planning documents. This evening, I will summarise our objections, and then Julie will set out why we believe the officer's assessment should be challenged. In addition, as mentioned by the officer, he's added a further document today into the agenda pack. Started off as 10 pages and was reduced to 5 pages for some reason. Given the action group have not had time to consider the document, I'm regrettably unable to comment on it. So our objections fall under 6 key themes. Number 1, the proposed solar plant would dominate the North Baldock chalk uplands. In fact, the council's own LVA recognises that, and so did an LVA that we commissioned from John Etchell's Consulting. It's disappointing the officer makes no reference to John Etchell's report, and so I will quote his conclusion. In summary, the site is simply too large, too exposed to view, and the local landscape is too sensitive for an appropriate location for a large-scale solar farm. Secondly, the whole field has been assessed as grade 2, best and most versatile agricultural land, and will be largely lost to food production for 40+ years. There are substantial amounts of lower grade farmland in North Hertfordshire, and furthermore, running a few sheep under the solar panels would do very little to make up for the lost production. This year, we estimate that the wheat produced in this field alone would have provided Weetabix for everybody in North Hertfordshire, some 133,000 people, every day for 15 weeks. Number 3, the proposed route for the construction traffic is not safe. It is clear that Highways agrees with our point of view, and the compromises do very little to reduce the risks. The narrow Bygrave and Ashwell roads are used by many pedestrians and cyclists and are already dangerous with some sharp bends and overgrown verges, and the proposed changes at the junction with the 507 would only increase the risk to the local population during the construction period. It's odd that the landowner didn't offer access from Newnham Road just off the A507. The construction process would be noisy, and once in operation, solar plants generate a continuous humming sound. I would urge you to visit the 2 local sites at Royston and Reed so as to understand that point. This is why these plants should not be sited next to people's homes. The applicant has submitted a noise assessment report, but using assumptions agreed with the applicant. 24 Acoustics makes it very clear that other parties, including the council, are unable to rely on the report. We ask that NHDC commissions its own report. There is no credible grid connection plan. According to the applicant, this site is at the furthest possible economically viable distance from the electricity substation. That was when interest rates were 0.1%, not 5.25% as they are now. Furthermore, it is clear that the connection route would be much longer given the need to navigate around Baldock, under the A1, under the East Coast Main Line. There is also no indication of how long it will take UK power networks to plan and then lay the cable. That could take many years, and any claim today that it's ready to go is completely unproven. And then finally, we believe that the applicant hasn't actually built any solar plants yet. It's a privately owned company. It's demonstrated little interest in trying to work with the local community. They operate a scattergun approach to these proposals, which are all speculative in nature.
Hi, good evening. I will be focusing my comments on the planning officer's report. As I have a few minutes, I won't be able to substantiate my comments, but please ask questions at the end. Table 2 on page 132 sets out the planning officer's subjective personal views about the harms and benefits of the development and the relative importance of each of these. I will provide the views and comments of the Bygrave Action Group. This is not meant as a criticism of the planning officer, but we need to be able to put across our views for this to be a fair process. I'll begin with the harms. Too little weight has been given to the impact on landscape. The landscape and vistas would be decimated by the development. I would also add that the site lies in an area designated as rural beyond the Greenbelt. Local policy SP5 recognises that these areas contain some of the highest quality countryside in the district, and its policy designation is designed to restrict the types and amounts of new development that can occur. The impact on best and most versatile agricultural land has been understated. This is very high quality agricultural land, and the loss of this for 40 years has not been adequately taken into account. This underassessment has been compounded by the planning officer using the assessed biodiversity gain to justify giving a lower weighting to the impact on agricultural land. This is an incorrect approach, as biodiversity is included in the planning balance as a benefit in its own right. To allow for it here also would be double counting. There would be impact on residential amenity. There are properties whose gardens back onto the site, despite what we've just been told. The noise impact assessment prepared by Pacer's consultant is flawed. Very importantly, no consideration has been given to the requirement of section 3.1 of NPPF that planning policies and decisions should aim to identify and protect tranquil areas which have remained relatively undisturbed by noise and are prized for their recreational amenity value for this reason. Surely the proposed site is exactly the type of area that was in mind when this paragraph of the framework was drawn up, and exactly the type of site that it aims to protect and preserve. Indeed, this area is described in the Hertfordshire Landscape Character Assessment as tranquil. There would be risk from construction traffic, and this should be given significant weighting in the planning balance. Highways acknowledge that there would be risk, but use the facts that it's to enable the need for renewable energy to be addressed, and it's for a temporary period to justify taking this risk. And finally, on harms, there would be risk from fire. Turning now to the benefits. First of all, an urgent need for renewable energy isn't actually a benefit, and this should be deleted from table 2. It is an issue for which a solution needs to be found, and the planning officer has identified generation of renewable energy within the district as being the solution. This has been taken into account in determining the weighting to be given to the benefit of renewable energy. The weighting given to renewable energy in table 2 is very substantial. However, in the main body of the report, the weighting is shown as substantial, not very substantial. Also, the weighting of substantial has been justified on the basis of, I quote, the availability of this grid connection and the immediate delivery of the proposed development. So a question to ask Pace would be, when do you expect to begin generating electricity on this site? Is it immediate? We have concerns that the biodiversity net gain has been overstated. And finally, a weighting of significant has been given to economic benefits, but very little information has been provided to justify this. If table 2 were amended to reflect our views on the harms and benefits of the proposed development, the harms would clearly outweigh the benefits. We believe that the facts speak for themselves. This is a wholly inappropriate site for a solar plant. Please, please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification from James and Julie, members? Councillor Levitt?
Yeah, could I just come back? I'll just get back to me note, it's just gone off. The biodiversity net gain, you were challenging the figures on that. I want to come back to that later in the debate actually, but what's the basis of your challenge on those?
Yes,
you're actually saying that they couldn't achieve that net biodiversity. Is that what you're getting at?
That's what we believe. If I could just give a little bit of background, I think that'll make it a little bit clearer, if that's okay. So first of all, we're not questioning that there'll be a biodiversity net gain. We're not questioning that. What we are concerned is that we believe it's been overstated. So we submitted detailed comments on this to the planning officer, not Peter Bull, he's taken over during this process, but his predecessor back in June last year. So a lot of the points we're making, we made best part of 18 months ago. And we respectfully at that point requested that the council commissioned its own independent assessment. So the calculations of the net biodiversity gain have been carried out by an organisation which was appointed and paid for by PACE, and using a DEFRA model which has received much criticism, is being open to manipulation by developers. So the risk is that the assessment understates the level of current biodiversity. So even if the assessment of future biodiversity is reasonable, the biodiversity net gain will be overstated. There was an article in the Times.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? Could you tell us what you think, what's your estimate for?
I couldn't possibly do that, Valley. It's very, sorry, Councillor Bryant, I beg your pardon. That was very familiar, wasn't it? I apologise for that. There's a huge spreadsheet that does it, but I would like to explain why I think it's been overstated by one of the ratings that they use in there. If you would
2 minutes
put me to do that, yes. Okay, so it starts out by looking at what they believe the biodiversity is at the moment, and it rates the grasslands around the fields as being poor. Now, we find that quite surprising because the landowners been participating in the stewardship schemes that are offered by the government, and says on its own website that it leaves 3 to 6 meters of land for wildflowers and grass around the fields. And that's supposed to improve biodiversity. So we're concerned that it's a false position of the starting point. And I'll just read the conclusion from Professor Shreve for another review that he carried out. He's ecology conservation at Oxford Brookes. He said the biodiversity metrics have been applied with erroneous initial values, and the so-called biodiversity plan is really a work of fiction. So they just pointed out, and we have those same concerns. It's easy to manipulate results. And that's why when there's a potential conflict of interest, because let's be honest, PACE want you to agree to this. And, you know, there's lots of room for subjectivity here. It's better to have your own report carried out.
Must admit, I was hoping for a percentage, but
well, I'm not a biodiversity expert, but I can question what's there.
Thank you. Councillor Muir.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions for James and Julie. First of all, what makes you think there's a risk from fire?
I'll take this one as well, if that's okay. I'm surprised that anybody would think there isn't. Let me talk to you about the fire at Old Swan in Liverpool. So that was a fire of a BESS, so a battery, basically. And that's at a site, it's a couple of years ago now, and they had to carry out a special inquiry into it because it was a significant incident. It was, they believe it was a failure in the battery system, but they don't know what caused it. It caused something called thermal runaway. And it just went mad really, really quickly. It took 59 hours to put the fire out, because these fires, they're really chemical reactions, and it doesn't need oxygen to continue burning. They ended up with people in hazmat suits trying to deal with it. There's a very detailed report and lots of recommendations about how to deal with things, which we raised this as an issue again back in June last year, but we've had no response from the planning officers on that point.
I'll just stop you there because I know Councillor Muir's got 2 more questions.
Can you please tell me more about the membership of the Bygrave Action Group? Like how many members and where do they live?
Yeah. I'll answer that one if I may. Yeah, thank you. Bygrave Action Group was set up by the Bygrave Parish Council after we had a sort of community meeting in St Mary's Church Hall when the news first broke. The chairman, Phil Hills, who I think is somewhere here, asked me to chair it. We sort of put the word out that we wanted to form this group to resist this application. 10 members were pulled together. We all but one live in Upper Bygrave, the other one lives in Lower Bygrave. And we basically made it our business to understand the application. We formed the view, as I said, that we actually really support renewable energy. But we, as a group, have serious concerns, which I outlined earlier. Is that enough?
Yes, please, because I think you've got your answer there. And your 3rd question, Councillor Muir?
Yes, certainly. Why do you think that the noise will be a problem with the housing at the south of the solar farm at Upper Bygrave?
So there was a noise assessment carried out, and that was, again, it was commissioned by PACE and paid for by PACE, and it's very clear in the report that nobody other than PACE can rely on it. It's based on statistical modelling, which you'd expect. They're trying to project what they think the noise levels will be in the future, but that relies on making a lot of assumptions, some of which we've got serious concerns about. I am a qualified actuary, I should say, and I have a degree and a master's in maths, so I do understand statistical modelling. A few key assumptions: it's assumed that the ground is soft. And the softer the ground, the more noise it absorbs. But a more typical assumption will be something in between. Now, what's really important is how hard is the ground when the solar panels are working at full tilt, which is in the heat of the summer. And I can tell you my garden across the road is not soft at the moment. It's jolly hard. There's no adjustment made for tonal noise, which solar farms are tonal, they hum. So there should have been an addition made to the noise that's generated. And there are other things, I won't go into all of it, but even at that, it's recognised that you expect to be able to hear it from the knoll. And the knoll is a real concern for me because I'm not sure cumulative effect on the knoll has been taken into account. It's been identified that there would be major impact from a visual perspective for the knoll.
I'll have to stop you there because you're going off the subject. Just to answer your question.
Can I say thank you for those answers?
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure who this question is aimed at, actually, but the point was just made about the fire at Old Swan in Liverpool. I'm sort of concerned about that, but can anyone answer? Is that of any? Do we know how relevant that is to this matter? Because obviously, it may or may not.
In a field.
I didn't say it was in a field. I was going to say, do we know if it's the same equipment, the same power, the same? It's just because it's sort of been thrown into the debate, and obviously it sounds serious, but I've actually got no idea if it's relevant or not. Has anybody got any facts we can use?
Well, hold on to that because we might find the officers have got some information on that. Other questions of clarification for James and Julie from the officers, from the members, sorry. Is that it? Do you want to pick that up now or later?
I can pick it up now, given that it's in our minds. As I understand it, the project at Liverpool was actually within a residential area. It was for 4 storage containers that contained batteries. It was a small battery storage facility, and the manufacturer of that equipment no longer manufactures that equipment.
Thank you, that's useful. Can we now go to the member advocate, Councillor Lisa Nash? You've got 10 minutes, Lisa.
Good evening. There are many reasons why this application should be rejected. The officer's argument in favour of this application rests primarily on a misinterpretation of the council's climate strategy and aspiration for the district to be carbon neutral by 2040. To be clear, there is no council policy in favour of building solar farms on private land. What's more, we have a local plan that states that applications such as this will be decided based on national criteria. Despite this, the officer pursues a narrative about North Herts having to supply enough renewable energy to cover its usage. He talks of an urgent local need, whereas the amount of green electricity North Herts already receives from nuclear power and offshore wind completely dwarfs anything a local solar farm of this size could ever sell to the national grid. The officer's report repeatedly emphasises the need to produce renewable energy while saying virtually nothing about actual carbon savings. That is because if this solar farm were built, it would only be a tiny contribution towards achieving the carbon zero ambitions of this council. There is one mention of reducing emissions by 11,300 tonnes a year. This only makes up less than 1.7% of North Herts' produced 683,000 tonnes of carbon. Actually, less of the total emissions for the year. So it is hard to see how that can be described as a significant contribution. The officer's report postulates that there is an urgent local need, which is unjustified and massively overstated, with no real evidence to support this claim. Keeping things in perspective, we must apply the same stringent scrutiny to this application as if it were a housing development on the same site, not skew the balance based on spurious reasoning. This proposal has significant harm which outweighs the benefits. This council itself recognises this site as a valued landscape deserving of protection from incongruous development with characteristic features of an area designated in its landscape study of 2011 as the North Baldock Chalk Uplands, a rolling chalk landform characterised by large-scale open landscapes with dispersed farmsteads, with long-distance views from local vantage points. The study adds that this type of landscape is relatively rare in this district. Regarding visual sensitivities, the study lists extensive views across the large-scale open rolling landform, long-distance views from localised high points, and open views from most roads and lanes, which I can agree to because I've been to the site. And the openness of the North Baldock Chalk Uplands would make it more difficult to accommodate large-scale open uses without significant visual impacts. This would not be in keeping with the rural character of the area and could introduce new elements that would conflict with the current open sweeping views. The characteristics of the openness and gentle hills make the site extremely prominent, being clearly visible from the adjoining field in the Greenbelt to the south and from the hill to the north, including the site of the scheduled ancient monument and Iron Age hill fort. Local roads and paths all look down over the site, and the proposed hedges will never conceal it. The government's MPPG confirms that the area is a problem, saying large-scale solar farms can have a negative impact on the rural environment, particularly in undulating landscapes. Paragraph 174 of the MPPF states, planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes. And paragraph 175 states plans should allocate land with the least environmental or amenity value. This is a valuable and valued landscape in an unspoiled rural setting adjacent to a village. The public right-of-way is significant, bordering the site on two sides, is much appreciated and well used by walkers, cyclists and horse riders, many coming from elsewhere because of its appeal. There would be a great loss of amenity with enjoyment of the route spoiled by the site and operating noise of the installation. Building a solar plant here would be a classic case of destroying a significant local environment in an attempt to save the global one. There are far more suitable locations nearby along the A505 and railway line, for example. We have to consider the loss of grade 2 agricultural land. It's common knowledge that the MPPF recommends that the best quality land should continue to be farmed for food production, which is needed nationally, not just locally. The officer's report suggests that because North Herts doesn't have much lower grade farmland elsewhere, this grade 2 site is worth sacrificing. The MPPF is a national guideline. It doesn't recognise district boundaries. A district without suitable land is not automatically entitled to use unsuitable land. We need green energy and we need food. This field is productively farmed, so should remain in use for food production instead of being converted to an industrial site in the midst of a valued landscape. The applicant was eventually persuaded to commission a noise impact assessment. The consultants, unsurprisingly, reported that it would be feasible, in principle, to achieve average construction noise levels that are acceptable without detailing how the average is compiled. The results for operating noise were derived from modelling because the equipment manufacturers had no available measures of the actual noise spectrum generated by their own equipment. Requests for an independent assessment to be carried out on behalf of the council were not taken up, and I remain seriously concerned that the operating noise of the plant will be disturbing not only to users of the bridleway, but to nearby residents in their homes and gardens. There is a highway safety issue. For this project to go ahead, the road junction in Baldock will need to be enlarged to allow the construction vehicles to enter Bygrave Road. The applicant's 97 low loaders and 310 articulated trucks and hundreds of other HGVs will then have to negotiate a quiet rural lane to reach the construction site. These articulated vehicles will be required to carry heavy plants such as JCBs, cranes, transformers. The 310 other articulated lorries are needed to deliver the panels and frames. The highways officer recognises that this road is inappropriate for heavy trucks. It has a 7.5 tonne weight limit and has imposed a condition in the interests of safety. This states that only 2 articulated vehicles may access the site per day, so 4 movements. This concedes that these vehicles are indeed a hazard on a lane like this. Residents voiced concerns around serious injury or death. There is no restriction on the number of non-articulated HGVs accessing the site per day. The condition means that 407 deliveries envisaged by the applicant to be carried out using the articulated vehicles will take 41 weeks to complete at a rate of 2 per day. The site is at least 4.5 kilometres away from the Letchworth substation as the crow flies. In reality, the distance will be much greater, throwing the viability of the site into question. Despite requests, the applicant has been unable to show the route the cable will take to the substation, which will have to circumnavigate the BA1 site in the local plan, pass through part of Baldock, cross the railway line and A1M motorway.
1 minute left.
It is ironic to be meeting here in the same room that is hosting the public inquiry into the Wymondley solar farm, for which I was present at planning committee.
Let's stop you there, please. We can't refer to the inquiry.
Okay. There are many lessons we can learn, and I urge you to seriously consider deferring a decision on this application until that inquiry is completed. This application is incomplete and unconvincing. Please consider the significant harm that this proposal would cause. The loss of visual impact and loss of public amenity, loss of some of the best and most versatile agricultural land, noise impact and effect on highway safety, with many unanswered questions, such as why the applicant never responded to requests to provide a substantial woodland corridor around the southern boundary to the site in order to cut off visibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say that we cannot refer to the inquiry that's going on. These are separate things.
Why not? Why can't we refer to what's been?
But I think assumptions are being made about the outcome of the inquiry. In my mind.
Oh, but if something's being said at the inquiry, it's a matter of public record and on video and that.
It's evidence of inquiry. Because in my mind, that's how I see it. So please accept that. Right, where are we up to? So yes, yes. So have we got any points of clarification, members, for Councillor Nash? No. Shall we go on to the supporters, please? We've got 3 supporters, Mr. Rob Shaw, Mr. Edward Wainwright and Mr. Stuart Redaway. Are you going to organise a time between you? Begin when you wish.
Good evening. I'm Rob Shaw. I represent the applicant. We're a British-based renewable energy company, and our vision is to help the country avoid the worst effects of the climate emergency and to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Our additional priority here is to help reverse the loss of biodiversity in the local area. The UN describes the climate emergency as terrifying. It is giving us more extreme weather affecting all of us, while at the same time the cost of living crisis means many families are needing to choose between heating and eating. Our solar farm will generate both low-cost energy and make a crucial contribution to the council's target of a net zero district by 2040. Our grid connection isn't subject to delays on the transmission network, as we've heard, and it is available now, and the energy is deliverable as soon as the development is constructed. We carried out an extensive exercise to identify a site that's outside of the Greenbelt, to consider brownfield sites, and to choose a field where the impacts could be minimised. This is all set out in our submitted site search. We worked closely with officers and engaged early with the local community. Their feedback has improved the final proposals, and we welcome the community's specific suggestions in the last few days for community benefit, and we're keen to agree specifics with them. The topography means there'll be minimal visibility of the site from Bygrave. The footpath, cycleways and bridleway will all be protected and screened by nearly 1.5 kilometres of new hedgerows and trees. We've carefully considered the effect on traffic and horses during construction, resulting in a new temporary access and restrictions on HGV movements with the agreement of the Highways Authority. We followed the advice of the British Horse Society in the design, the choice of fencing and the management of the construction process. Biodiversity will be a big beneficiary here. There are countless examples of solar farms delivering very considerable biodiversity net gains, with important species protected, and this will provide habitat for all local wildlife. In addition, to help secure this and make sure we deliver those net gains, we've developed a management plan for the project's duration. So in summary, this is a very well located and designed project which has attracted local support and delivers considerable benefits. The proposals comply with the local plan policies, and through planning conditions, all the technical matters have been addressed. So we would encourage councillors to support our application in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a family member and a director of AE&WA Farm Limited, which owns and farms Todman's Field. Our family has farmed in North Hertfordshire for some 400 years, so you'll understand that our local environment is important to us. Indeed, all of the woods around Newnham and Arbury Banks have been planted and tended by my forebears over the years. Our family objective is the sustainability of our enterprise and ensuring financial security for future generations. Farming has always been at the core of our business and very much still is. Times have definitely changed, in food security and climate change being high on all political agendas. The removal of the landowner subsidy has been replaced in somewhat by environmental stewardship schemes. As a result, we now have over 50 acres set aside to wildlife. These have resulted in significant increases in populations of smaller birds, insects, butterflies, and their predators. Over recent times, we have seen huge changes in agriculture. We now find ourselves far more vulnerable to global events, both physical and weather related, both meaning that some arable crops are now marginal to grow. As custodians of the land and for the future of our business, we need to diversify our income streams to secure the longevity of our business. The PACE proposal will help provide our family business with a certain long-term income stream outside the fluctuations of crop margins, and also address the needs of the national requirement for green energy, which we all need to support. The land in question is reasonable, grade 2, and grows good crops. However, it is important to realise that a solar farm would not be a loss of agricultural production, as we would still farm sheep in the identified area, and after the term, the area would still be returned to cropping. Looking forward, food security, wildlife protection, and energy self-sufficiency are key to the agricultural landscape. Without solar farms such as this proposal, these ambitions become more difficult. Initiatives such as this proposal move us closer to our long-term sustainability objectives, and we consider the PACE proposal as a large step in the right direction. I would urge you to support it. Thank you.
My name is Stuart Redaway. I'm a resident of Ashwell and have lived in the area for 53 years. I'm here to speak in support of this proposal for renewable energy generation in North Hertfordshire By the way, can you hear me? I know my voice isn't very strong. On balance, I support this proposal. No site is perfect, and there are some valid disadvantages of varying significance. First, I discuss many of the disadvantages, and then at the end I summarise why I support the proposal. 1. The site is north-facing, which means less kilowatts per unit area can be generated. However, it will generate enough electricity for perhaps 15,000 houses, which is not negligible. 2, the access for construction traffic on narrow country roads is poor. This will last months, not years, and be perhaps 2 big lorries per day, so it is reasonably tolerable. If local residents could receive some recompense, that would be good. Bygrave Action Group, or BAG for short, and some others have made a meal of part of the farm being visible from Arbury Banks, a site of ancient hill fort. But the site itself has extremely limited visibility from Arbury Banks, which will be over a mile away. So that concern is greatly exaggerated. Concerns have been expressed that views from Upper Bygrave will be spoilt by the farm's solar panels, but because the panels are on ground that falls away, they will mostly not be visible at all, and the very limited viewpoints from which the farm site can be seen at all, the view will be mostly of the grass picnic area at the top of the site. Also, noise has been mentioned, and this land falling away means that needs to be taken into account. The noise transmission to Upper Bygrave would be less than if the area was flat. What is true is that the farm will be very visible to motorists and pedestrians and cyclists on the road from Ashwell. Some people will be dislike this, but some will be interested and pleased to see renewable electricity being generated. BAG says the farm is the right idea, but in the wrong location. That's the classic NIMBY argument. Polling shows that the public is mostly in favour of more onshore renewable electricity. 61% of people living near solar farms strongly support solar. Solar electricity generation is intermittent, which is why the proposal includes battery storage. This enables middle of the day generation to be available for the peak evening demand. It also enables storage from sunny days to be carried over to darker days. Release of stored electricity be largely governed by the hour-by-hour price of electricity. Batteries do not provide storage, however, from summer to winter. Some people have said that only Pace and the landowner will profit from the farm, and that this is at the expense of local people. But generating renewable electricity reduces climate change, which is a public benefit. Government policy involves drilling more oil and gas in the North Sea, which is a much worse option.
1 minute left.
Some people say it would be better to put solar panels on roofs in brownfield sites, e.g. buildings over car parks and on warehouses. This may be so, but broadly it's not easy. Excellent where it is achieved, but it should not be viewed as an alternative to solar farms, but additional. The more solar, the better. Pace is paying for the farm, not taxpayers. Putin's war restricting energy supply has put up the price of electricity, making solar more profitable. It could be taxed. Homes and businesses struggle with the cost of electricity and the planning committees to approve renewable applications. If in the future there are periods with more intermittent electricity and can be handled by the national grid, green hydrogen can be generated. I leave to Pace the issue of planners possibly requiring reinstatement of land in the future. Personally, I expect solar generation to continue on the site for a very long time. On balance, I support the proposal, which will reduce greenhouse gas emissions at no cost to taxpayers. We need more renewable energy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Edaway. Are there any points of clarification from for our three speakers from members? Councillor Levitt?
Yeah, I have a few points actually which to bring up with two of the speakers in particular. Mr. Shaw, as the applicant, when the site becomes operational, how many people will be employed on the site? Full-time work, monitoring work in the site.
So our sites, like all solar farms, are largely monitored remotely in terms of their day-to-day functioning. So they will be remotely monitored, and then there will be people coming to the site on a periodic basis for routine cleaning, maintenance, and that kind of thing. In addition to that, then there is the land management, which will be undertaken by the landowner, which will manage the hedgerows, the creation of the wildflower meadows, the new tree planting, and so on. So the numbers of people, I think, would be probably in the region of sort of total numbers, probably 10 to 15 people.
Thank you for that. So following on from that, the second speaker, sorry, I didn't pick your name up. You're currently farming the land, and you said you can put that land to use for sheep farming with the solar panels on there. Do you currently do sheep farming, and have you weighed up the economics of sheep farming against that, of what you're doing at the moment with cereals and grains and things? Does it work? Does the sums work?
It's all part of the it's all part of farm. Going again, it's all part of farming. So yes, we do have sheep. They're not directly ours. We have a guy that works for us that runs sheep. He's got about 950 head of sheep across our farm and other people's farms at the moment.
Sorry, Chairman, last little bit was on about the energy, which actually came up from what one of the speakers said there. I think it was the third speaker, about being the energy being able to be stored and sold at the best price and everything. Really for Mr. Shaw, I think, is the energy you produce from a solar farm doesn't necessarily go directly into local use, does it? It just goes into the national grid and be used wherever demand is. So if there's a greater demand, say, and it gets a bit cold and rainy up this time of year in Scotland while we're nice and warm, that grid demand would be going to feed Scottish energy needs, not ours. Is that I know it's a bit basic way of putting it, but is that sort of the right sort of interpretation?
Is that something you can answer?
Yeah, so yes, theoretically, everything goes into a national grid and could end up at the other end of the country. The reality is that electrons tend to go to the closest point. So if there is demand locally, they will be going to whatever demand is connected to the grid. So I would expect a very large proportion would be used in the local area just by virtue of the way electricity behaves.
Thank you. Any other points of clarification for members? Councillor Mason.
Yeah, a question for the applicant. Councillor Nash raised a very reasonable question, a fairly fundamental one, which was why there? Why not another site further along? I think she said, why not another site further along the railway or along the A505? Yeah.
So we went through, as we do with all solar projects, we go through a very extensive site search process. So we start by trying to identify points on the electricity grid where there is capacity to accommodate these kind of developments, which is by some distance the biggest constraint on any developer, because our electricity grid just wasn't designed for this type of electricity. So we're redesigning the grid at the same time as redesigning the power system. So we identify capacity on the grid point that you saw on the plan from Peter Bull earlier. We then consider what is a viable grid connection route, so a distance rather from that point of connection. In this case, it was quite a distance, 5 kilometres. We felt we could viably make a connection. We then start to look at sites, and we go through a systematic sieving exercise. So we sieved out all of the sites in Greenbelt, which is probably about 90% of the area. We then looked on a pretty much a field or area by area basis to see whether there are sites that are suitable and whether they're available for a development. And we looked actually beyond the district here, because some of that radius took us over into the neighbouring district. So all of that is set out very sort of clearly in the reports to show exactly why we've chosen this site and why other ones weren't available. So ultimately, this was the only site that was both suitable against those criteria and had a willing landowner to bring a scheme forward.
Councillor Peace.
Yeah, thank you. Some previous speakers have made reference to conditions that have been put in place, suggested that you'll be restricted to 2 articulated deliveries a day, and that's between 9:30 and 2:30 only. And it was suggested that that would increase the construction time to 41 weeks by another speaker. I wondered what your calculations show that effect would be on your construction time.
So we're working through the implications of that, but we're comfortable that we can make it work within the timeframes we've got by redistributing the way deliveries are made and their frequency through the project. So on a site without that kind of restriction, you know, we can present an average number of deliveries a day, but they would typically be focused on the early parts of the build. In this case, we're having to rework our construction process, timeframes, and management plan. But we're confident that we can make it work within the sort of 35 weeks that we indicated.
Good. Any other clarification? No. Can I invite the officer to respond to any issues raised? Have a proposer, please.
Before we start into any debate or anything, can I just make a request and 2 ask for some clarification? First one is a request that any votes we make on any decisions tonight are a formal recorded vote.
That's fine.
The second one is the Secretary of State's message, or as if I understand correctly from what was read out earlier, the Secretary of State has ordered us not to grant planning permission.
No. Would you like to explain?
Could we read it out again? So just I'm a bit unclear about.
I'll let Sean have his version of it.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Chair. A direction has been issued by the Secretary of State that directs this council not to grant planning permission on this application without his authorisation. We could refuse planning permission without his authorisation. He makes it clear that it doesn't prevent the council from considering the application and its merits this evening, and for members to form a view on its merits. And if you're so minded, as I said earlier, in refusing planning permission, you shouldn't read into this direction any view for the Secretary of State. Basically, the holding direction will give the Secretary of State an opportunity to consider whether he wishes to call in the application. If we were to grant planning permission in the meantime, there'd be no point in the holding direction, and he would have missed the opportunity to review the case before making a decision as to whether to call it in. So the holding direction effectively prevents us from issuing a planning permission, but it doesn't prevent you from resolving to grant planning permission. We just won't be able to issue the decision notice.
So we can have the debate and we can have the vote.
Yes,
and that's it.
Yeah. You can resolve to grant. Sorry, you can resolve to grant planning permission this evening, but we would not be able to issue the decision notice.
So, Councillor Nolan.
Sorry, he's still looking for someone to propose at this point. I think on the basis of what's been said there, I would like to propose that the council defer the decision on this until such a time where any direction may have been made. And I just feel that it feels futile today to carry on with this when we can't actually grant, you know, if it was to go in that direction, to grant that permission as the planning committee. So I'd like to propose at this point we defer until a later point at which some other decision had been made at a higher level.
Can I just check, if we deferred, what would that mean for the outcome? So we go straight to the Secretary of State for...
We would inform the Secretary of State that the Planning Control Committee deferred making a decision pending the Secretary of State's decision as to whether to call in the application or not. And if the Secretary of State decided to call in the application, then a public inquiry would be held by an inspector, and he would report to the Secretary of State on the outcome. It would make things a little bit problematic at the public inquiry. Therefore, I believe that even if the Secretary of State decided to take the power onto himself, we would have to, in the meantime, resolve what our decision would have been so that we know what to say at the public inquiry.
Just on that point, I know obviously that, you know, deferment would mean that the councillors here in the committee hadn't made a decision, but obviously at this point officers have put forward their views in terms of a considered view of whether the application should or should not be approved at this point. Would that not then be the view put forward on the council's behalf in any public inquiry?
No, it couldn't, because the power to determine the application doesn't rest with officers under the scheme of delegation. It rests with the Planning Control Committee. So it would have to come back to Planning Control Committee to ascertain what your decision would be in any event. So you either make the decision tonight or on another night as to what your decision would be.
But theoretically, could that be after the Secretary of State had called the application in and had it considered, and then allow, I suppose what I'm trying to ascertain is, could we allow that process to take its course and understand whether or not then we would have a free hand to make that decision as councillors, rather than, I suppose in this case, if we make the decision and possibly it could be positive, which would then be potentially, you know, have to wait for that decision to be made. I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
Yes, we have the power to make a resolution based upon your assessment of the proposal. What we don't have is the power to issue the decision notice. If we were to make a resolution tonight to defer the decision, we would have to make a resolution at some point as to what our decision would be. If the Secretary of State decides not to call in the application, then you would have to consider whether you want to grant planning permission with no restrictions placed upon you. If the Secretary of State decides to call in the application, the Planning Control Committee would have to resolve what its decision would have been if the power had not been taken off yourselves and placed in the hands of the Secretary of State.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I was going to come from a very similar viewpoint, actually, that I think it would be wise to defer it to see if the Secretary of State calls in. Yes, we have got to make a decision at some time. However, if we could debate it tonight, we could make a decision. And the Secretary of State may not call it in which case we're fine. However, if he does, we've got to go through a whole public inquiry process, which we see already going through today. I don't know, I'm not allowed to mention it, but I'm going to mention the one we are going through a public inquiry process on a similar thing. If he doesn't call it in, then fine, then we can debate it and determine it for ourselves. If he does call it in,
yes, we still got to debate it, but we under the understanding that we're not going to be able to grant permission or anything. It's going to be a Secretary of State's decision. So to me, I'd like to second that we defer it, waiting pending to see whether the Secretary of State calls it in or not.
Okay, Councillor Debenham.
Yeah, I was just, thanks. Councillor Nash spoke about many unanswered questions, and I'm sure if we can defer this, we can maybe get some of these answers. I mean, I for one would like to go to one of the local solar farms and hear the noise. We'll just, just give us a bit more time to get a more informed decision.
Thank you, Councillor Mason.
I was just going to ask, are we allowed to know the reason for the Secretary of State's decision? And was it on the merits of this particular application or just a dislike of solar farms?
Someone will have contacted the Secretary of State asking the Secretary of State to call in the application.
To ask a supplementary question, Chair, because I'm just trying to gauge how much weight I should give it, because I hear there's a letter from the Secretary of State. That's wow. But it's difficult to know what weight one should give it.
Yeah. I mean, if you'd like, if I can give my view, it was only by chance we actually noticed that in fact the email had been sent tonight. In many ways, because it was so close to the meeting. And so I think the assumption is from the person who sent the email is that we would continue. Otherwise, they've done it a lot quicker than this. And that we have gone quite a long way of the process of actually hearing from the speakers, having debate. And I think the natural point would be then to continue with the vote. It would then, the Secretary of State then could take their time, decide whether or not they're going to call it in. But at least we've actually done the whole process and been involved, which is another way of looking at it. I'm not saying it's a helpful way of looking at it. But it's good. There's some more opinions coming up. Councillor Muir.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've heard enough. I think I would like to propose that we refuse this application and debate it now.
He had a proposed and seconder for it to be deferred. So we'd have to do that first. See what happened to that one. So do we want to have a debate on the proposal to defer? I don't know if you're pressing your button or not. So shall we go to the vote on deferment and get it the right way around? So, yes.
Can I just, before we go to the vote, if members could make it clear that the reason for deferment, so that at least the applicant knows why, in case they're able to. Could we please have a reason for deferral? It's only because it's helpful to the applicant to know exactly what it is that he's, if they decide to take any action, what type of action they need to be taking in terms of deferment, what reasons have been given for that.
Yes, so it's proposal of deferment on the basis of waiting to see the outcome of the Secretary of State being minded to call in the decision.
Could you repeat what you just said? Sorry.
Yeah, certainly. So it's deferment on the basis of allowing the decision by the Secretary of State to be made on the basis of whether or not they wish to then formally call in the proposal.
That's what you've suggested, that you wish to defer it pending decision by the Secretary of State as to whether or not he wishes to call in the application. What I'm not clear about is whether the applicant has a right of appeal against failure to determine the application in the meantime. So, don't know.
I honestly don't know because of the Secretary of State. Sorry, my understanding is because the Secretary of State sent in a letter asking for the holding direction, the holding direction will only count if we decide to follow the officer's recommendation to approve. If we decide to refuse, my understanding is that then they probably won't call it in because we've refused it. So the only way that the holding direction really works is if you just make a determination to follow the officer's recommendation. I don't know if that helps you or doesn't help you.
Councillor Nolan, then
Yeah,
Councillor
I'm
Winstanley.
not sure there's anything that's been particularly helpful with the understanding this process so far with such short notice to understand it. I think though on that basis, I'd still like to go with the proposal to defer for the time being.
Just let me take Councillor Winstanley's.
I was just going to ask if there's any precedent for matters like this being called in and the length of time that the Secretary of State would, you know, is there any precedent? I know it's a bit like I'm not expecting you to know, but.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Sorry, yeah, it was just, is there any precedent for the amount of time that it may take for the Secretary of State to make a decision if we were to defer? Could it be weeks, months, years?
For the East of Great Wymondley case, the Secretary of State took about 5.5 months to decide whether to call in the application or not.
Okay.
I would just like to say the actual statute allows for 21 days, and that's supposed to be the time that they're supposed to come back, but however they didn't. So they are supposed to be set by a limit so that it doesn't obviously leave the applicant waiting and leave us not knowing what we want to do, which is why I will say again, the impact of the holding direction would be if you decide to go with the officer's recommendation. If you choose not to, if you choose to refuse, then there will be no reason for the holding direction. I'm still not sure what will happen if you have a deferment and what the applicant's course will then be because we've deferred.
I think thinking through, obviously we've only recently had the holding direction. We got it 40 minutes before the opening of the proceedings. The holding direction, as I said, does not, as Noanata said, does not prevent you from refusing planning permission. But what it does is prevent us from issuing a planning permission. The Secretary of State makes it clear in the letter that the direction does not prevent you from considering the application and forming a view as to its merits. So deferring a decision based upon that phrase in that letter to await the Secretary of State's decision would not appear to fit with the intent of the Secretary of State, which is to allow you to make a resolution on the application. Councillor Debenham did say earlier that he would like the opportunity to go and visit another solar farm to ascertain the noise levels at that solar farm, and that could be a reasonable basis for deferral for members to take the opportunity to visit another solar farm. I know an opportunity was given for members to visit the application site, but if members decided they wanted an opportunity to see a functioning solar farm, then that could form, in my view, the basis for deferral. But the Secretary of State's direction, in my view, would not form a particularly sound basis for deferral, because the Secretary of State makes it clear that the holding direction does not prevent you from forming a view as to the merits of the proposal.
So We're back to the fact that Councillor Nolan has proposed deferment. Are we to accept Councillor Debenham's suggestion for the reason for deferment?
I'm happy to include that as the an element of the reason for deferment. Yes.
Thank you. And who seconded it?
If the deferral was simply to look at the noise, when we reconsider the application, it would just be noise that we'd be considering at the next meeting. Just must make that clear.
Chair, if I make a suggestion as a seconder on this one, that I think apart from noise, there's been another number of issues raised tonight that have I think we as a committee would like more answers on several of the things here. But we've had this 8-page document issued, which I think only came out today with the supplementary. It's only on the public website today. I think there's a number of issues around the noise, around the biodiversity, the Secretary of State's intervention, and other things that I think we need to take a little bit of a breather on this and think again. And I think that's probably all of those things rolled together is a good reason for deferment, to allow us to address the issues that have been raised so far and bring it back again.
Councillor Muir.
Thank you, Chair. If we're going to defer and go to another solar farm to listen to the noise, then we've got to go to a solar farm of the same size as what's proposed at Bygrave.
Possibly to actually visit a solar farm the same size would actually answer quite a lot of the questions and get some of the statistics that we actually want. Would that work? Oh, sorry, Councillor Nolan. Well,
I think just in the interest of moving things along, I'd like to take the comments as put forward by Councillor Levitt as the basis for deferment, including the late arrival of a lot of the information we've had to consider tonight, which I personally didn't have time to look at myself due to time constraints. And on that, I think probably all happy now to move the motion and take the vote if possible.
Sorry to be the stickler again. Just to be clear, what the reasons for that deferment is, because as Sean has just told us, if you're looking at those reasons for deferment, those are the reasons you'll be dealing with when the item comes to committee again. So just to be clear about what those issues are. So at least the one, you know what you're looking at, and also what the applicant needs to address.
Okay, so based on what's been said so far, it is obviously the lateness of the announcement, the decision made by the Secretary of State, the provision of quite a large amount of information within 24 hours of the holding of the committee. It is the issues around noise and investigation into that. And again, I think one of the other issues raised around traffic and access to the site and understanding exactly what effect that would have. Yes, as well, yes.
Have we missed any? Louise?
And if it's allowable, the route of the access to the substation, the cabling to the substation?
Yeah, that's it.
Does that form
That's
part
not
of this
part of
application?
the application. That'll be a separate one.
Okay.
Anything else to be added to the list? Take some time to think about it.
So it happened so quickly in such a short time that I think we need time to think again.
Right. Can we go with that, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we go with that?
Sorry.
Can we go with that list? Can we go with that list?
I believe so.
Yeah. Right, so yeah. Go and let's have a little chat about this. While we're waiting, can I just say I was very perturbed about the amount of emails that came in the last 3 days with precise questions. I mean, we had some emails that had 20 questions on them, and the officer actually diligently actually answered all those queries, and that we were getting emails on this and other applications this evening up to just before the meeting, just to give you a flavour of what it's like.
Bygrave Parish Council relating to conditions, and that may be something that you wish a response from officers upon.
Happy to add that to the list.
Are we ready to go with the vote? So we're voting to defer. So yes, is to defer. Sorry? Recorded vote. Yes, it's included in the minutes, yes. This is not like the old days. Right, can we go to the vote, please?
Chair, the decision to refer this item has been carried.
Thank you. Those of the public who are here for that item, if you wish to leave, please feel free to leave now. And we will have a break for 15 minutes. Okay. Oh, interesting.
It was. I think it just wasn't really helpful.
Well.
And so I don't know how Are we live? Welcome back. Welcome back to Councillor Tyson. Item 8, which was a 22/03092, has been deferred till the next meeting because we're awaiting a report. So item 9, 20/02412/FP, land between 53 and 81 and land rear of 7 to 53 Waterdale Lane, St Hippolytes. Anne MacDonald to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some rather complicated updates, I'm afraid. So I'll try and through these as clearly as I can. So an email was sent round earlier on yesterday. So I tabled reports. So in summary, these include some minor typos and amendments to the heads of terms, with a correction to an error to the stated affordable housing contribution and the inclusion of the sustainable transport contribution with works upgrade 2 bus stops. The updates also propose a recommendation of the application to include further clarification on sustainable transport. However, a response has been received today from the County Council Highways, which has also been emailed to you, which is, oh, sorry, I've lost it. I thought it was just being organised. It's this response here, set out to Councillor Strong. I'll read this out. It's one paragraph, but I'm going to read this out to you. And it says, I've reviewed our formal highway response to the submitted application, and Gary Henning has also updated me on the footpath pavement link from St Hippolytes to Gosmore. Please note that in determination of the application, the need for Section 106 contributions are balanced against the level of off-site highway improvements offered by the applicant as part of the development to ensure that accessibility by sustainable modes is maximised in line with the Hertfordshire policies and objectives. The off-site improvement works include upgrading the existing bus stops and cycle footpath improvements outside the development. These are provided in lieu of a public transport contribution. The Highways Authority consider this to be reasonable, and on this basis, they do not consider any further consideration of sustainable transport measures is necessary. As a result, in the tabled updates, which were published on the website earlier, I recommended amending the recommendation to include an additional point, which was to the planning application be granted subject to the new clarification from HSE Highways regarding local sustainable transport. However, as that clarification has come in today, which I was not expecting when I tabled this update, I'm now proposing we revoke back to the proper recommendation as set out in the committee report. Thank you on that point. Did everybody understand that? Does anybody want me to go over that a bit more slowly? So in summary, I'm saying ignore my update on the recommendation and revert back to the recommendation in the report. Thank you. The officer has put together the slides and presentation. It's fairly lengthy, so I'm going to try and move through this fairly quickly. There'll be some plans of the development. I think it's every plan on the development and some site photographs. So please, can I have the next slide? This application site is mainly from the housing allocation site SI1, which is adjacent to the south edge of Gosmore. SI1 is also now within the settlement boundary of Gosmore, a category village, as obviously it's an allocated site in the local plan. Small parts of the application site, which on the east and west side remain in the green belt. In the southeast corner of the site is a Grade 2 listed, largely subterranean ice house, which is to remain and be repaired as part of the development. There are 2 TPO protected trees near the southeast boundary and 7 TPO protected trees near the northwest boundary and in the eastern part of the site. A public footpath runs through the middle of the site from Waterdale Lane in the north to Half Handkerchief Lane in the site south. This footpath is to be retained and upgraded and widened. And St Ibs Lodge, a dwelling near the southeast corner of the site, is a Grade 2 listed building. The site is primarily an agricultural field. Ground level slope down gradually from the northwest to the southeast. There's an agricultural access in the southeast, currently off Half Handkerchief Lane near to London Road. Trees and vegetation form most of the boundaries of Half Handkerchief Lane, London Road, and the rear boundaries of the parish hall and with Waterdale Lane. The most numerous and significant trees are near London Road and on a northwest boundary from the rear of the parish hall and to number 53. The boundary with Half Handkerchief Lane is primarily hedge and vegetation up to about 3 metres in height, so will offer a fair degree of screening and views from the lane. The side boundaries of number 51 and 83 Waterdale Lane, and where the site is adjacent to Waterdale Lane, feature smaller vegetation and some fencing. And there's no natural boundary on most of the rear southwest side boundary, as much of it extends through the field. Properties in Waterdale Lane adjoining the site are mainly 2-storey semi-detached dwellings and a small number of bungalows, as well as the single-storey parish hall. Gosmore extends further to the north, with many 2-storey terrace dwellings on the north side of the lane. Open countryside extends to the east, south and west. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, that's obviously the red line application site. Next slide, please. So the proposal is for 52 2-storey dwellings, 21 of which will be affordable, with a mix of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom properties proposed. The housing allocation is for 40 as set out in the local plan policy, but as set out in the report, this is a guide only. And due to the good mix of dwelling sizes, there's no objection to the number of 52 dwellings proposed on the site, as the layout is considered to be acceptable. A new vehicle access is created onto London Road, with the dwellings served by an internal access road, driveways and footways. An agricultural access with a gate would be provided in the remaining field to the southwest. The public footpath linked to Waterdale Lane will remain and is to be widened and upgraded, which you can see running across the site. New hard and soft landscaping will be included, along with a local area for play in the northwest near Waterdale Lane, and a suds drainage attenuation area in the southeast adjacent to London Road. New trees will be planted within the site, notably along the main entrance road and along the public footpath and on the southeast and southwest boundaries. The listed ice house will be repaired, protected and managed in accordance with the submitted conservation management plan, and the works to ensure this are set out in conditions 13 to 16 of the report. All development would be within the boundary of the allocation area, apart from the rectangular area at the west, which is to be landscaped and to provide additional biodiversity area. The applicant has agreed to the requested planning obligations for affordable housing, sports and open space contributions, education, library, youth services and sustainable transport contributions, which are set out in detail in paragraph 4.3.62 of the report. Next slide, please. This shows the proposed access off arrangement, with the new access coming in off London Road. New footpaths are proposed on the west side of London Road and 2 new crossing points using tactile paving and drop curbs. Next slide, please. This shows the highways detail arrangements in slightly more detail. Next slide, please. This shows the soft landscaping and planting plan for the development, with new tree and vegetation planting in the biodiversity gain area, the sud space in this corner of the site, and the siting of new habitat for use for birds, bats, hedgehog highway, and a log pile habitat. Next slide, please. This details the different types of hard surfacing material to go across the development. Next slide, please. It's not very clear, this one, but this shows the different types of boundary treatments, with blue being fences between the gardens mainly, pink being brick walls, which are in the areas where there's a bit more street scene running alongside them, and there'll be brick piers and railings on the main entrance and timber post rail fence on the southwest boundary. Next slide, please. This shows the public footpath in more detail. Next slide, please. This shows a 10-year plan, with blue dwellings being market dwellings and green and pink being the affordable units. Next slide, please. This shows a external materials plan, with red and pink being red multi-face bricks respectively, and the roofs will be brown and red tiled. Boarding and render will also be used on some external elevations to create some visual interest. Next slide, please. This shows a refuse plan to show that all houses can be the refuse vehicle lorry can access to the development. Next slide, please. This is meant to delineate the fact that each dwelling will have cycle storage on site to be policy compliant. Next slide, please. Again, this plan shows that EV parking is shown throughout the site, again as a policy compliant requirement. Next slide, please. This shows the street scenes. This first one is the main entrance road. Next slide, please. This shows 3 more frontages in the western part of the site. Next slide, please. This shows proposed views from London Road, Half Handkerchief Lane, and through the part of the middle of the site. Next slide, please. This shows the views from the rear and the side of adjoining Waterstone Lane dwellings and the 3 other street scenes and general views. Next slide, please. These are then a series of plans showing the building type. So this is the largest building, which is the block containing 6 flats. Next slide, please. This is units 39 to 41, which is a row of 3 terrace dwellings. Next slide, please. As a pair of semis forming units 33 and 34. Next slide, please. This is units 19 and 26. Next slide, please. Did we move? Oh, units 7 and 8. Next slide, please. Units 16, 20 and 30. Next slide, please. Then this shows the garages, and the next slide, please, is also garages. And then we're going to move on to some photos. So next slide, please. This is a photo looking south down London Road with location of proposed new access slightly in front of the traffic island. Next slide, please. This is looking north up London Road with a junction with Half Handkerchief Lane on the left. Next slide, please. This is the Grade 2 listed St Ibbs Lodge on the left, looking down Half Handkerchief Lane in the middle with the application site on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This is looking west down Half Handkerchief Lane, west of the agricultural access and St Ibbs Lodge. Next slide, please. This is the location of the ice house, which is also sunken in the ground. Next slide, please. This is looking down the site towards the southwest from the near east boundary. Next slide, please. This is continuing along the northwest boundary, rear of the Waterstone Lane dwellings. Next slide, please. This is the site looking further east still. Next slide, please. This shows where the northwest boundary meets the east boundary of London Road. Note that the larger trees in this photo and the preceding 3 photos of the trees with the TPOs. Next slide, please. Looking further along the southeast boundary of Half Handkerchief Lane, the trees here on the other side of Half Handkerchief Lane. Next slide, please. This is facing the southeast corner of the site. The tallest tree in the centre is the one protected by the TPO, and the listed ice house is near to that tree and on its right. Next slide, please. This is looking at where the site joins Waterstone Lane with the public footpath entrance on the left. Next slide, please. Neighbouring properties number 51 and 53 Waterstone Lane. Next slide, please. This is looking east along Waterstone Lane from near the public footpath entrance. Number 47 and 49 Waterstone Lane are in the middle on the right, with the 2-storey 7-detached dwellings beyond. Next slide, please. This shows the west boundary of the site with 81 Waterstone Lane and part of the site itself. Next slide, please. This is within the site from the public footpath on Waterstone Lane, looking south. Next slide, please. Looking at part of the boundary of the Half Handkerchief Lane, showing the rear of the site on the public footpath to the left. Next slide, please. This is the side elevation of the neighbour number 53 Waterstone Lane. Next slide, please. This is the rest of that boundary, and the public footpath runs alongside this boundary. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the site with the public footpath on the left, continuing down to Half Handkerchief Lane. Next slide, please. This is looking across the site from its west towards London Road. Next slide, please. And this is the entrance of the footpath from Half Handkerchief Lane. So in summary, the application obviously is an allocated housing site and local plan. There's no objections to the unit mix, the layout, and the technical details, and the application is recommended for approval, subject to the three points set out in the report. Sorry for the error. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Any questions from members? Councillor Winstanley.
Sorry if I missed this, but the speed limit on the road at the moment on London Road is 40 miles an hour, I think, at that point. Is that to remain at 40, or is there proposals for it to be brought down to 30?
As far as I know, that's to remain as 40 in that location.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ian Moody.
Just a quick clarification. You said EV parking. Is it EV parking on the site or for each house? Each house. Then.
Yes, although there'll be also some shared for the flats.
Thank you.
Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, just a little bit of clarification around the ice house and the footpath leading to it. It sort of says the site will remain undeveloped, but you're putting a footpath to it. And from the pictures there, it looked a little bit, how shall I put it, untidy.
The ice house is to remain in its location. The footpath is adjacent to it, but not on top of it. And there's a whole document about how the ice house is going to be repaired and protected. And those works are ensured by conditions 13 to 16 in the report.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Tyson.
I just wondered how long the gardens were in Waterdale Lane, i.e. what sort of separation is there between those houses and the development site? And to follow up, there's the boundary fence that you mentioned. Do we know what that's going to look like? And does it replace something that's there already?
The boundary fences I was referring to are new fences proposed around the gardens, and they'll be standard 1.8 metres high. The gardens in Waterdale Lane are long, and I believe I read in the officer report there in the region of about 40 metres. So that there's no issues with back-to-back distances. There's also quite mature trees along that boundary, those rear boundaries. So the officer does state in his report that he's not concerned about loss of privacy or overlooking issues between the existing neighbours in Waterdale Lane and the proposed new dwellings.
Okay. Well, that fence doesn't replace a hedge or anything like that?
I believe, I can double check that plan, bear with me. I've got the presentation open on my system so I can look at the plans more quickly. The hedgerows one. The fence plan. Blue lines. No, that's shown to be inside the application site with the existing black line for denoting the rear boundaries unaffected.
Thank you.
Councillor Nolan.
Just to clarify, for the parts of the site that sit within the green belt on the western side, so excluding the side towards London Road, but I know it's an indicative plan, but just to check, is there anything proposed to actually be built within the green belt segment?
No, all the development is within the allocated area, which is now out of the green belt. The rectangle area that's within the green belt is going to be landscaped and enhanced with landscaping and biodiversity, sort of logs and things like that for insects.
Thank you.
Councillor Muir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the conditions. There's very few. Will there be a condition for electric charging points for electric cars?
Thought I saw that one on there. Let me just double check the conditions, sorry. If not, we can add it. If it's not there, we can add it on. But I thought it was on there when I looked at them earlier. If you've spotted that it's not there, then I'll say we'll add it. Condition 23, yes, it is there, right, thank you. Yes, it's on there.
Page 234.
Yeah, it's condition 23 on page 234.
Shall I read it out to you? Councillor Muir. Shall I read it out to you? Prior to occupation, each proposed new dwelling shall incorporate an electric vehicle ready domestic charging points. That's its full name. It is there. I've just read it out for you. Any more questions? Should we go on to the register of speakers? We've got Councillor Robert Moore and Lorna Else. Yes, and you're going to share the 5 minutes between you. Begin when you're ready, please.
I've pressed it and nothing's happened. Oh, you have to take yours off.
Oh.
How we do that?
Okay.
Very kind, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Control Committee and officers. I'm sorry about the confusion. I sat at the wrong table. I do apologise. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Robert Moore, Secretary of the St Hippolyte's Parish Council Neighbourhood Development Plan Steering Group. And as I hope you can clearly see from the length and detail in this report, a considerable amount of work and collaborative work has gone on during the past 3 years between us and the applicant and their representatives. The Parish Council have now fully considered all the proposed amendments before you and had taken the view that we were now, on balance, able to support this application. Consequently, I had first registered to speak in favour tonight, but for the fact that when this report was first published only last Friday, we first realised that the request for financial contributions towards a short length of new footpath along Hitchin Road, Gosmore, has not yet been secured or agreed. Paragraph 3.2 on page 198 has omitted any mention of the proposed footpath. Subsequently, Countryside Properties, when asked if they would consider additional contributions to Herts County Council, quite correctly highlighted that at paragraph 3.4 of the report, very substantial contributions in excess of £1.2 million plus indexation were already to be secured by a Section 106 agreement payable to Herts County Council. Having spoken today with the development manager team leader, Anne MacDonald, she had kindly agreed that further clarification from Herts County Council needed to be sought. I also remain extremely grateful to former Area Planning Officer Tom Ray, having already secured some initial contributions to this very important footpath scheme. Once completed, this new footpath will provide enormous improved safety benefits for all residents of the parish, many of whom choose never to walk along London Road because of 40-mile-an-hour traffic speeds, pollution, and the difficulty in crossing at the Three Moorhens roundabout down towards Hitchin Town Centre. Instead, most pedestrians, particularly those accompanying small children on bikes, dog walkers, all much prefer to walk along Waterdale Lane, through Gosmore Village, and up a significantly quieter footpath using the footbridge behind the Three Moorhens pub. It's just so much better and safer. And with this final linking piece, as already acknowledged, will make a world of difference for residents. The argument that it is not related to this site in St Hippolyte's or justified is clearly not true. Our only quandary, and here I take the applicant's side, is that already having been asked to pay £1.2 million to Herts County Council, they feel the well is dry. Certainly St Hippolyte's Parish Council do not consider 50% of their contributions towards Priory School is the best way to spend so much of their money. A fairer share we're asking for is for £400,000 towards secondary education, with the unilateral undertaking to secure £220,000 to be spent within St Hippolyte's Parish. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'm Lorna. I'm a local resident. In the foreword to North Hertfordshire's local plan, Councillor Ruth Brown talks about the importance of sustainable development in the context of the climate emergency that the council itself declared in 2019. She talks about consideration of the natural environment, the provision of open space, sustainable transport systems, and working with local communities to create places where people want to live, work, and spend their time. She tells us the purpose of the local plan is to deliver growth in the right place, of the right character and quality. These are important goals now and for generations to come. This means today we have a unique opportunity to build a housing estate that meets the local plan's goals, a housing estate that is truly sustainable, one that considers the natural and heritage environment, one that has been developed by working with local communities, one that respects the local plan's defined boundary and recommended number of houses and doesn't exceed them, a housing estate of the right character and quality. To meet the local plan's objectives, this housing estate needs more than a few EV charging points and back boxes. It needs to meet BREEAM standards to uphold the best practices in sustainable building design, construction and operation. It needs to align with the 2025 Future Homes Standard with alternative heating, solar panels, rainwater harvesting and green roofs. It needs accessible open space within the site's designated boundaries and not rely on adjacent green belt fields to provide it. It needs to complement the rural, natural and heritage environments that surround it so that they are protected and people enjoy living and spending their time there. But this proposal fails to meet the local plan's goals in almost every way. So why would you approve it in this current state? I speak for many residents and we want better, far better than what is currently proposed for our village. And we hope you do too. You will have read our objections on the website. And as our local councillors, we're relying on you to represent us. As you come to your decision today, we'd like to see this as a unique opportunity to help shape a housing estate with credentials that meet the local plan's goals and credentials that collectively we can all be proud of for years to come.
Please.
Which means rejecting this proposal in its current state. Thank you.
Thank you. Any points of clarification from members? Councillor Nolan?
Yes, sorry to Mr. Moore, just to confirm, you were suggesting there that you'd ask for funding to be removed from the current secondary education contribution, and then would that be towards the footpath then instead?
Thank you for your question. And I'm sorry that I had to rush through that, but I'd agreed to share the slot. Absolutely. We're in St Hippolyt's Parish. Look, Section 106 monies, and I spent a considerable amount of time today and this week with district councils as well, trying to argue that Section 106 monies should at the very least be spent as near as possible to where the sites that they are supposed to help mitigate any identified harm. Now, we've worked hard. We think we've brought improvements. We've worked with Countryside, even though my friend next to me speaks passionately against the development in its current form. Overall, we take a very supportive stance of what has been a very long journey. And that's why tonight, at the literally 11th and a half hour, I have begged that some of this money, Countryside are being asked to put £1.2 million into Herts County Council's pocket. Frankly, we feel that some of that, perhaps 15%, should be shared and spent in St Hippolyt's towards a very worthwhile safety highway footpath improvement that will benefit many, many residents for years to come. I had actually asked Anne MacDonald if we could have a picture and a plan of where the alternative footpath would go. And if members are aware of just how fast, polluting and uncomfortable London Road is to walk along, and particularly when you get to the Three Moorhens roundabout. On our side of Gosmore, there's a lovely footpath that takes you with a proper footbridge over the Priory bypass behind the Three Moorhens pub. And for people with small children, buggies, pushchairs, scooters, dogs, it's the perfect place to walk. And all we're asking is for a small link between Gosmore Village and the start of Brickkiln Lane, which the engineer at Herts County Council, Gary Henning, has been working on for several years. Tom Ray, the former area planning officer, worked closely with him to secure some initial funding. And frankly, if from St Hippolyt's Parish Council's point of view, we can't ask for a small percentage of the Section 106 contributions towards what is clearly a very, very worthy safety improvement. I can't think of another site in St Hippolyt's where we could go to and ask for £100,000 worth of contributions. I've suggested to the developer that if they could take a small reduction in the secondary school education and share a unilateral undertaking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Levitt.
Actually, I was about to ask the same question, but just to follow on from that, is it without? Can we actually do that? Can we change the 106 agreement, or can we make a recommendation and look at it again?
In summary, no is my opinion. The county council obviously have their published guide or toolkit, whatever they call it now, which they can ask for contributions under, and they have their own categories. And this obviously scheme has been assessed against this criteria, and they've obviously asked for the contribution education based on the need that this application generates with regards to pupil yield. Separate to that, they've obviously assessed the application for sustainable transport measures, which is what I was seeking clarification for. And that was the email I read out earlier. So I have spoken to Mr. Moore a couple of times recently, and I tried to get some clarity on this issue for tonight. And they've come back and confirmed that they're happy with the sustainable transport contribution that they are asking for, which is actually upgraded to 2 bus stops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mason.
I think you may have already answered this, but I assume then we have no say in how they spend the education, how Herts County Council spend the education amount, because it is illogical that you're giving £600,000 to a primary school whilst anyone going from that new housing will have to pass the other 2 secondary schools in town.
Can I just say in short, it's within an area, the education budget spent within an area. So in fact, they look at the whole district and the knock-on effect on schools. So though, if say money is going to primary school, in fact, it will affect all the education provision in that area. And that's how it works. It's not for particular sites or particular locations.
Thanks for the clarification.
Dick, you turn your microphone off, please. It looks like you want to speak. Any more questions from the councillors? Can we go to the member advocate, Councillor Claire Strong, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, committee, for allowing me to come tonight. I'd also like to actually put on record my thanks to Anne McDonald, because I went to St Ibbot's Parish Council on Monday night, and where I picked up that the parish council were not happy when they read the report for this application coming to committee, because this footpath, which, as you've heard tonight, Councillor Robert Moore is very passionate about, had not been included in any of the Section 106 allocations. Now, that then meant there was a chain of events, and I contacted the planning department to Sean first, who then directed me to Anne, who actually has picked this application up because she's not the case officer. But the main question I was asking was this path considered, and why was no allocation made towards it? And I know that we've had an answer from Highways, but actually they didn't actually answer that question. Now, we know that within the local plan that we are looking for policies that will provide sustainable travel and through new routes and that for our development. And as we go forward, we're going to have a lot of new development. So we do need to make sure that we do have the paths and that going in the right direction. And here is an opportunity that St Ibbot's Parish want for the village of Gosmore to have a really good path to connect them to be able to do that sustainable walking that's safe through their village. The Highways think that what they've done with the money is reasonable. St Ibbot's don't think it's reasonable. They want to use money to refurbish 2 bus stops. I actually think that those 2 bus stops, they're not new bus stops. They should be part of a maintenance program and not be coming out of new money. New money, 6 from 1 money is the only time that villages in our communities, wherever they are, get the opportunity to have improvements that they would like to see, and not even considering this aspiration that St Ibbot's Parish have is quite really it's unreasonable. What we should be looking as council is how we support our communities, and when they've asked for something that they would like to see as part of the mitigations to have this development within their village, then to find that it's not even discussed or considered. I think that is the question that I have raised with officers, and I have to say I'm a bit disappointed that Anne has taken out of the additional condition that she was going to put onto the report, which would be to go and look and do a little bit more work on looking to see on whether or not the funding that had been asked for and the funding that had been approved and allocated, whether or not there was any more wiggle room in that to actually perhaps look and see and put something into the 106 that the village actually wants. I have to say the numbers as well on this plan. I mean, it has been a very long ongoing planning application. It is in the local plan for 40. It went to 64 and it's now come down to 52. So there is a lot of extra housing in that. And I think the village just feels, or certainly the parish council feels, that if they're going to have to take on this housing, then they need to get some benefit out of it from the 106 monies. If this council had implemented SIL, a lot of the developers would be paying an awful lot more money into those pots, which would be able to and would be there and available to communities to actually have some of the improvements they would like. So I do think that it's not unreasonable to perhaps, as you as a committee, to perhaps ask if you could put that condition back in and ask that officers go and have another look at looking at what the transport monies are that are put in are available, and see if that could put at least some money towards a footpath that actually the parish council would like, and certainly I think most of the village in Gosmore would like, and it would make it would then, if you had to go walking around, you could actually do a nice circular path if you wanted to go that way, but you'd have a much nice pathway to come into Hitchin from those villages, which avoids the London Road, avoids going up to the roundabout at Three Moorhens, which I think if we all know, if you go and look at the air quality monitoring, is one of the worst hotspots that we've got in this district. So anyway, thank you, and I hope you will consider putting back that condition.
Thank you. Points for clarification for Councillor Strong? No. Supporters, Mr. David Fletcher.
Thank you, Chairman. David Fletcher from Stratton Parker, speaking on behalf of the applicant's Countryside. We fully support the case officer's recommendation for approval, which will see the early delivery of 52 dwellings, including a policy compliant provision of new affordable homes, as we've heard, within an allocated site within the adopted local plan. As we've also heard, the application before you today follows a long and extensive period of working closely and collaboratively with your officers and a range of statutory and non-statutory consultees. Members will note from the committee report that there are no objections to the application from any of the statutory technical consultees in terms of drainage, ecology, landscaping, heritage and highway matters. I also welcome the comments from Councillor Moore from the Parish Council, and we have worked very closely with them as part of the application, which has involved a number of meetings, and it's very pleasing to hear that on balance the Parish Council are supporting the proposals. It is our view that the proposals will provide for a high quality design-led development. When the planning application was originally submitted way back now in November 2020, it proposed a scheme for 62 dwellings. However, having taken on board feedback from your officers and statutory consultees, the application was amended to reduce the number of dwellings to 52 dwellings. The density of the proposed development is very modest at 16.3 dwellings per hectare and is reflective of the prevailing densities in this location. The proposals have been sensitively designed to ensure that proposed dwellings are well set back from Half Handkerchief Lane, and also to ensure that the existing route of the public right-of-way which dissects the site is fully maintained. A generous area of open space is also maintained around the listed ice house, and as we've heard, we're looking at a detailed management maintenance plan to substantially improve the current status of the ice house. In addition to the delivery of the much needed market and affordable housing, the proposals also have a number of other benefits. This includes the delivery of 0.6 hectares of public open space within the site, which includes a children's play area. This is against a policy criteria of 0.31 hectares. In addition to the 0.6 hectares of public open space, a biodiversity enhancement area of wildflower meadow to the southwest corner of the site is also proposed. This will deliver an overall biodiversity net gain well above the legislative requirements. We are also proposing a financial contribution towards the improvements of play equipment at the Gosmore Recreation Ground. We've worked closely with the Highway Authority in respect to the transport improvements in the area. As you've heard from officers, this will include the provision for a new 3-metre wide footway cycleway to the north of the site along London Road up to the junction with Waterdale Lane, along with the provision for 2 safe crossing points over London Road. The proposals, as we've heard, will also secure the provision for bus stop improvements. We've obviously heard the detailed and passionate speeches both from Councillor Moore and Councillor Strong. From our perspective as applicants, we're obviously bound by what we get back from the statutory consultees, in this case Highway Authority and the District Council, in relation to the overall Section 106 package. Therefore, in the event that members resolve to grant planning permission today, subject to the completion of that Section 106 and conditions, Countryside have confirmed that they're committed to the quick delivery of units on this site. At the scale of 52 dwellings, the site will be delivered in one phase and built out quickly in order to assist with maintaining the council's 5-year housing land supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Any points of clarification from members? Councillor Stanley.
Hi there. Sorry, I don't know if I missed it in the initial presentation, but is there solar? Sorry, probably a bit tired of talking about solar, but is there solar panels to be on the houses? And I'm just sort of thinking how off grid they are. Like, will there be heat pumps? Like, what sort of any of that included?
We're looking at a range of sustainability and energy measures, and I think that's being secured by condition. I forget which number it is actually off the top of my head, but there is a condition that requires a submission of an energy statement.
Sorry, I was just we were looking at the map trying to work out the footpath. Any other questions, clarification? Can I invite the officers to respond to any issues raised? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Levitt.
Chair, just before we do, I just want to pick back up with the officer on this sustainable transport contribution.
Okay.
The bus stops were done on a recommendation of our transport planning officer. It says here, Transport Officer Planning Policy, North Herts District Council. Please can I request the bus infrastructure contributions towards 2 nearby bus stops? But you said you spoke to clarification about the HCC, about Herts Highways, about sustainable transport. Has it been put to our transport officer at any time that a better use of the 106 contributions may be actually doing something with that footpath rather than the bus stops? So in fact, could our transport officer change the request from having the bus stops to having the footpath, as long as it didn't change the overall 106 contributions?
I don't know the answer to that because obviously I'm not a case officer, so I don't know all the details. I think as a guess, that's probably not been put to county. Having checked through the case in a lot of detail the last 2 days, I'm aware that both in the highways response, they've asked for the bus stop upgrades, and also our own policy officer has. I note that in the officer report, in the delegated report, Andrew Hunt has only made reference to it that coming from the policy officer, but it is that same request is also in the response from Herts Highways. In Herts Highways response, they asked for it to be a section 106 payment. In Andrew's report, he's referred to as being a section 278, which is what the policy officer asked for. That's why in my updates that I emailed around yesterday, in the final bullet, I've said that the paragraph 3.2 of the report states the comments of the transport officer requesting upgrading works to bus stops be sought under section 278. However, these should be sought in the section 106 agreement as sustainable transport contribution. Giving a bit more detail to what Councillor Strong was saying, I did email I emailed the County Council first with a list of questions asking about how we how they decide when a new footpath link is needed. So the questions I asked them is if a new footpath is needed, how is it decided when one is needed and who pays for it? If the land is in private ownership, does this mean the footpath is a non-starter? 3, if it is decided that a new footpath is needed, under what circumstances would planning application make a contribution towards the footpath? Does the footpath need to actually connect with the red line application site? 4, if it was determined that a payment towards the footpath could be sought, would this need to be a payment under the heading of sustainable transport or a section 278 agreement? And does a new footpath plan already need to be in place before a contribution can be sought, so the deliverability of the footpath on site is a known entity and thus is a reasonable request? And then 5, separate from any planning application, if local people believe a footpath is needed, how do they make HCC aware of its need? How quickly does HCC assess this and determine if one can be provided? And does HCC have an annual budget for new footpaths? And how quickly would it get provided if it is determined one is needed? Councillor Strong then emailed on that email asking for clarification on sustainable transport. And the email I read out first of all was the response from HCC to Councillor Strong, confirming that they believe the sustainable transport contribution for the upgrade of the bus stops is what they want on the back of this application. They have not yet answered my questions, and I did email them today asking for a response before tonight's meeting, which they haven't provided as yet. However, because in my updates, I set out the amendment to the recommendation to include condition A, clarification from HD Highways regarding local sustainable transport, I was of the view that the email response to Councillor Strong has clarified that, and that's why I recommended that we revert back to the recommendation in the committee report, because my belief, my questions are more questions in a general outside of this application context rather than questions within this application.
Yeah.
Probably confusing you all at 10:30 at night.
Yeah,
but that's the background of it.
What I was trying to get at was, could we put a condition or a request in any grant approval to ask for that thing to be looked at again?
I think if that's the way you'd like to go, maybe you might want to bring back my update,
Yes.
which part A says this issue could have further clarification. I would feel very uncomfortable with a resolution to grant where we say to county, by agrees in this meeting, we want you to take the money from the bus stop and put it into this, because ultimately we don't know if that's feasible or reasonable. I'd feel much more comfortable with the amended recommendation, which I set out in the updates, where we asked for this information, this matter to be investigated further, with the response shared between the applicant and parish council and the chair of planning control. And I go on to say, if this results in a change to the sustainable transport section 106 contribution, this to be agreed by the chair on behalf of the planning control committee. So it wouldn't necessarily require this whole application to come back to yourselves for consideration.
Okay, then in that case, Chair, can I move the recommendation with that bit back in again, please?
Will seconder, please. Councillor Mason. Councillor Strong. Is your light on? You can't actually speak at this point because we're in the middle of proposing and debating. Sorry. Okay then.
I think thank you very much for that, and thanks for the committee for listening. But there are some other questions that actually were asked to the officers, the highways officers, and those haven't been answered either, and I will put those back to them. So I think if you are going to go and do another round of decisioning and looking and asking your questions, if the other questions I was asking which you haven't referred to, I think those also need to be included. But I do thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
So we're back to, we have got a proposer and a seconder to, what are you proposing? To accept the application? Yeah, okay, should we have a debate? Councillor Nolan?
So this goes a little bit back to the section 106 discussion. And I suspect, given the answer before, the answer possibly no, but I just want to test it beforehand. So one of the concerns that's been raised is around the capacity for primary school children within the local area. We've obviously got the contribution that's being made for primary schooling within the reasonable area, whether it's full district or nearby. Is it possible to have a condition added which essentially links delivery of the extra capacity by whichever means the county council determines is the right way to do that prior to the first dwelling becoming habited? So obviously we're at a current stage where locally there is a lack of places or oversubscribed schooling. The money's been provided to rectify that situation based on the number of houses being provided and ensuring that there is places suitable to that number of houses being provided. Can we link the houses becoming inhabited to the delivery of the extra capacity for primary school children in the area?
I would say that's probably outside of this control of this application. I mean, there'll be a trigger point within the section 106 by when the developer has to pay the money to county. And that's normally before X number of dwellings are occupied, they have to pay the money to county. In terms of how quickly county then spend the money, I don't think that we have any control over that. And I think it would be wholly unreasonable to put an embargo on the occupation of the different houses before counties spend the money. I don't think that could be supported. Sorry.
county website, they actually have all the information about the different year cohorts, education and capacity and the maths, but it's not as straightforward as the children go to St. Ippitt School, for instance, and it's asked to grow. It's much more complicated than that. Debate. Any more contributions to the debate? So we have a proposer and a seconder to accept the application. Shall we go to the vote? Sorry, with the conditions. Right, so we get it straight. So we're voting on
the amended recommendation as set out in the update, which concludes A regarding sustainable transport. Yeah.
Let's go to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay. Item 10, 23/00549/OP, Bell Farm Industrial Park, Bell Lane, Nottinghamsted. Alex Howard to present.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Just a few updates. The first two are just typos. So in my officer report, paragraph 4.3.12, where it says plot 2 would be served by the secondary access due east of the primary access, this should actually say due west. And in paragraph 4.3.13, where it says there is an existing hedgerow screening the western portion of the site from view, this should say eastern portion of the site. And finally, I circulated an update to members earlier today regarding condition 8, which concerns biodiversity net gain. It was pointed out by the agent that the wording of this condition in its current form implies that biodiversity net gain must be agreed prior to determination of this outline application. However, this should form part of the reserve matters application once full details of landscaping and layout are agreed. Therefore, I have circulated an amended wording for condition 8, and I can read that out now just for clarity. As part of the details at reserve matters stage, a biodiversity net gain plan shall be submitted and approved by the local planning authority using the DEFRA biodiversity metric to demonstrate how a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain will be fulfilled by this development. So can we go to the slides, please? Next slide. Thank you. So this identifies the location of the site. The site is located on the north side of Bell Lane in Nottinghamsted. It is currently an industrial park comprising 22 units and quite extensive areas of hard standing. The site is designated within the rural area beyond the green belt within the local plan. Next slide, please. So this photo shows the existing frontage of the site with the existing dual access just there on the right for you. And there's an area of lawn and trees to the left. Next slide, please. And this is just another photo of that existing dual access. You'll see quite a dense hedgerow on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And this just shows another photo of that quite tall hedgerow relative to the access. Next slide, please. This photo shows the area behind that dense hedgerow, fronting Bell Lane. Next slide, please. And this shows the lawned area fronting Bell Lane west of the existing dual access. Next slide, please. This photo is of the centre of the site, showing the quite extensive hard standing and the utilitarian buildings that are on site on the left. Next slide, please. It's just another photo just showing that area of hard standing. Next slide, please. And just another view further into the rear of the site. Next slide, please. This photo shows the existing single access to the site, which is due west of that main dual access. Next slide, please. This shows that single access again, looking back towards Bell Lane. Next slide, please. This photo shows another view of the two accesses, the single on the right and the dual access on the left, on the other side of that lawned area. Next slide, please. This is just a photo showing the type of buildings on site as existing. You'll note their utilitarian nature. Next slide, please. And just more photos of the existing buildings on site. Next slide, please. And again, these buildings towards the rear, same sort of thing, quite utilitarian. Next slide, please. And this is a screenshot of Google Maps showing the site in context. I think you'll note the residential dwellings make up the majority, with this industrial park being the anomaly. Next slide, please. This is the site location plan as submitted. Next slide, please. And this is the indicative site layout plan, which identifies how the proposal could work on site. As this is an outline application, these details will be considered at the reserve matter stage if consent is granted. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed block plan and access plan for the site, showing the visibility displays from both access points just at the bottom there. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Alex? Councillor Nolan?
Yeah, just so in the report, there's seems to be a difference between your own, well, the officer's reading and the reading from the HCC highways reading as well, where they've made some comments where they're not apparently in favour of, I think, the nature of the access. I was just wondering, in your own sort of view, why it's, you know, a safe access going against the HCC view.
Sorry. Yeah, so I have actually tackled this issue in my report under, I'll just find the paragraph now. So 4.3.23 to 4.3.27. So I go through the four primary concerns from highways. Essentially, they were concerned about having two accesses for the proposed development and thought there would be conflict between these two. But the planning statement makes it quite clear that these accesses are quite good as they are. They get the required visibility displays. It's a 30-mile-an-hour road. So I didn't think that there would be any conflict because the single access would serve plot 2. Although it's within the red line and part of the application, they wouldn't have any real relationship with the other dwellings that would serve, the 8 dwellings that would be served by the dual access. There was an issue with visibility displays because highways initially thought this was a 40-mile-per-hour road. However, we checked this and it was actually 30. So that's been clarified. Another issue they raised was concerning pedestrian suitability of the site, as there are no footways present on Bell Lane. And obviously that would mean that most trips would be undertaken by private vehicles. I've acknowledged this and dealt with it in detail in the principal development section, basically saying that this is a rural area. It's not a suburban area, as the response states. You know, it's one of those things. And in the context of the whole application and the whole framework, we feel that this is a appropriate scheme compared to what's there at the moment. And sort of further on from that point, they do make the point in highways that this isn't a sustainable location for housing. Again, acknowledged in my report, but the material considerations in favour of this development outweigh that conflict, in my view, and that's why I've come to the recommendation I have.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley?
I don't know if any of this is sort of outlined at this stage, but is there any, or can you put in stipulations that the trees along the Bell Lane and the hedgerow, I know it looks like conifers and not sort of native, but does shield the houses that are there from the site. Can that be put in place?
Yes, so I think this is one of the concerns raised by one of the neighbours. So as far as I understand it on the location plan, that hedgerow that I showed on the right-hand side that's quite dense is to be retained, as are, I believe, the 2 quite large trees to the left of the main access. Yeah. Obviously, as I said, this is an outline application with access. So the other reserve matters, layout, landscaping will be dealt with if permission is granted. Now at the reserve matter stage, that's when we get to the details about those kinds of things. Yeah. And assuming we're happy with them, we can secure that by a condition, for example, which is kind of doing what you're saying to do, which is obviously what we'd like to do as well as a planning authority.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can we go straight to speakers, please? We've got Mr. James Gran, Dr. Julia McGill, and Mr. Phil Birchall. Are you going to divide the 5 minutes between you?
We are, yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I speak in support of the application as the agent. Your officers have provided a thorough and clear report with a recommendation for approval. The scheme is for complete replacement of the existing large industrial buildings and large areas of hard standing with a small residential development of 9 dwellings from this brownfield site. All matters are reserved apart from access in this outline planning application. Access is considered acceptable by the Highway Authority, contrary to their earlier comments, with the 2 existing access points being of a very good standard and within this 30-mile-an-hour highway, not 40. The excellent visibility displays will be permanently maintained. The frontage trees will indeed be retained, with dwellings set back suitably into the site. The existing industrial use does cause adverse impacts to the nearby properties, but also the village as a whole. The previous main occupier of the whole site, Aromco, attracted 50 employee vehicles together with daily HGVs to and from the site. The Aromco business evolved from a very small startup some 40 years ago and grew over the decades. It was therefore not a chosen site by an initial large company. The rural location is not suitable for an industrial use of this size, with narrow lanes being too distant from the main arterial highways for commercial traffic and its various impacts upon the small village community. After Aromco vacated the site, extensive marketing of the site as a whole has been carried out since 2021, resulting in no lease offers due to the location being too remote for convenient commercial transport journeys and due to the significant investment needed to refurbish the existing buildings of tired condition. The current tenants of individual units are predominantly storage use, with only 1 actual full-time employee being on the whole site. Therefore, it is demonstrated that there's no further interest in the full site from a main operator, with no loss of current employment use in this case, in accordance with policy ETC2. Therefore, the redevelopment of the site is wholly appropriate to make a positive contribution to the village rather than historic and ongoing issues with the industrial use. The indicative site plan demonstrates how the site can comfortably accommodate 9 detached, well-spaced dwellings with spacious gardens and in accordance with policy CGB4 of the local plan, no harm to the rural area to result. The environmental benefits of the scheme are far less vehicle trips compared to the current industrial use and the ceasing of HGVs to and from the site and ceasing of noise and odour impacts. Biodiversity net gain of the site will be achieved, to be later detailed under the Reserve Matters application and as required by Condition 8. This is in addition to the social and wider economic benefits of additional housing within the village as a contribution towards housing land supply, whilst making efficient use of this previously developed land as part of the existing community. As such, there is no identified harm which would outweigh the substantial benefits of the scheme. The application is in accordance with the North Herts local plan and the MPPF and is therefore acceptable for the grant of outline planning permission. Thank you.
I own Skylark Cottage, which is a Grade 2 listed building in Hampstead, close by the proposed development. I strongly support the proposal for 9 dwellings, which would enhance the setting of all the listed buildings on Bell Lane and would be much more in keeping with the small hamlet. The industrial use of the site has led to disruption over many years because of speeding traffic, heavy vehicles, noise and air pollution. Since the anchor businesses were replaced with partial use by multiple users, and because of its relatively isolated location, there have been multiple examples of antisocial behaviour and even serious unlawful activity on the site of late. On Tuesday this week, over 40 vehicles, including cars, vans and lorries, were there. The proposed development would lead to an important net environmental gain because of the significant reduction in the volume of traffic it would produce. Bell Lane is not suitable for HGVs, which cause constant degradation of the road. The officer's report has dealt with objections from highways. I would add, however, that contributions from highways were riddled with inaccuracies, which the officer has taken you through, and importantly failed to take account of environmental and safety gains from the significant reduction in vehicles. Because of their poor contribution from highways, I think not too much weight should be given to what they've said. I urge the committee to support the planning officer's conclusions.
I'm Phil Birchall. I'm chair of the Nut Hampstead Parish Meeting. The parish meeting convened on the 11th of May 2022 and 10th of May 2023, and the main options for the Bell Farm Industrial Park were discussed. These were for industrial units to remain, or for redevelopment of the site as a nursing home, or for the development of 9 residential dwellings. The 28 residents present in 2022 and 23 present in 2023 voted unanimously for the proposed 9 residential dwellings. There is clear support in our village for this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Points of clarification from members? No. Can I invite the officer to respond to any issues raised?
Nothing to raise, Chair. Thank you.
Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I think this is entirely unobjectionable and an improvement on what's there already. So it seems popular in the village, the neighbours want it there, and therefore I'd be happy to propose acceptance of this.
And Councillor Winstanley.
Happy to second. I agree with everything that Tom just said.
Thank you. Debate. Should we go to the vote? Oops. Yes.
Sorry, just making sure that that's subject to the changes I made to condition 8 at the start.
Yes. So say what you want us to vote on.
So the condition 8 is amended as I originally stated at the beginning of my presentation, that it BNG is dealt with before at the reserve matter stage, not this stage.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry.
So just for clarification, you are approving the application as recommended by the officer and the amendment to condition 8.
Vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Item 11, planning appeals. Sure.
Chair, yes, I'll not keep you much longer. We at the end of the report, we detail about 5 appeals that have been submitted since the last meeting, and there have been 4 appeal decisions. And just scrolling down to them, and all these appeals were dismissed. I don't think I want to raise any particular matters about those appeal decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I close the meeting, can we say goodbye to Nurata? This is her last meeting. She's going to go, I've got it written down, she's going to go and work in Uttlesford, which I think she's made up, but I believe it's near Stansted Airport, as in charge of their legal thing. So, well done and good luck for the future. I would like to close this meeting.
My thanks. I think you deal with it. You've dealt with us incredibly good grace and very efficiently. So best of luck.
Thank you so much.
So I'll close this meeting at 10:42. Thank you very much for your patience and your involvement.
We've got a lot of signing to do. I do apologise because there's 3 lots of minutes.
I've only got green, so I mean,